Chapter 126. It wasn't that Kenjaku was disgusted and intentionally spat on Aoi Todo's face. It was mainly because Itadori Yuji's powerful strike to her waist from behind was too overwhelming. Kenjaku's face was distorted enough to fit into a panel of a comedy manga, and the large glob of spit that involuntarily shot out of her mouth was entirely forced out by the impact. Aoi Todo had originally been grinning excitedly, but having that mouthful of spit sprayed onto his face completely threw him off, like fire meeting water, or having an assignment snatched away halfway through excitedly copying the answers. Aoi Todo, looking utterly bewildered, subconsciously raised a hand to touch his cheek. Kenjaku seized this inexplicably appearing momentary chance, covering her lower back with one hand as she quickly distanced herself from the two who were sandwiching her. "That's disgusting." "No, you are." Aoi Todo showed an extremely disgusted expression, while Kenjaku, clutching her aching waist, grit her teeth and immediately, somewhat uncharacteristically, refuted Aoi Todo's comment about her being disgusting. If purely discussing strength, Kenjaku possesses the power to decisively suppress any single disaster-cursed spirit, undoubtedly operating at the special grade level. In contrast, look at her opponents. Aoi Todo, Grade 1. Itadori Yuji, Grade 2. Maki Zenin, Grade 2. Kenjaku should easily be able to handle this configuration, yet due to a lack of information, she had fallen into the rhythm of the three of them, resulting in her current wretched state after taking a combo attack. That really hurts. Kenjaku felt the area of her lower back that her hand was covering. Being hit here was clearly much better than being hit in the head, yet for some reason she felt that being hit there was both humiliating and painful. After she recovered, her eyes gravely focused on the three of them, clearly showing that she was now serious. Her intense hostility immediately made the three opponents grow solemn. "Brother, your mother is strong. You must focus completely on the upcoming battle. We still have many dreams we need to accomplish together that haven't been fulfilled yet." Aoi Todo clenched his fist and his booming voice rang out. Itadori Yuji, who should have been the one to complain, did not object this time, but instead nodded seriously. "I know. I'll use 100% of my strength. No, I'll use 1000% of my strength. If I reach my limit, then I will surpass it right now." Itadori Yuji answered solemnly. Aoi Todo, standing beside him, was infected by his response, and the fighting spirit blazing around him intensified. He nodded and immediately replied, "As expected of my brother." Meanwhile, Maki Zenin, one of the trio, felt like a third wheel or a light bulb at that moment, involuntarily complaining internally that Yuji and Aoi Todo had only known each other for a few hours, while she, as a classmate, had known Yuji for several months. A few hours, a few months? However, this complaint only lasted for an instant. Her gaze also grew serious as she watched Kenjaku, reaching up to remove the glasses she had been wearing. Compared to Zenin Toji, the binding vow imprinted within Maki Zenin was incomplete. While Zenin Toji could sense the presence of cursed spirits purely through his absolute physical prowess, Maki Zenin required special cursed tool glasses. In battles against cursed spirits, she would intentionally or unintentionally slow down to prevent her glasses from slipping off. Since her opponent was human now, she could remove her glasses and fight without restraint. Fighting spirit high. Condition excellent. "Come on." Maki Zenin slightly lowered her stance, judging Kenjaku in her sight to be her prey, and immediately began the hunt. Watching the three opponents become overly aggressive, Kenjaku's face twitched as she slightly raised her head. She implied that she was only afraid of the Rikugan. Were these little brats getting too arrogant? Filled with anger, she raised both of her hands, preparing to form a Buddhist mudra. Domain. Clap. Another clapping sound rang out, and Kenjaku's position was swapped with Aoi Todo's. Itadori Yuji swung a fierce, war hammer-like punch toward Kenjaku's face. However, Kenjaku had already witnessed Aoi Todo's curse technique once, so she was mentally prepared. She quickly switched her subsequent physical movements, clenching her fist with an expression that said she wouldn't fall into the same trap twice. She planned to deliver a heavy punch to Itadori Yuji's lower back after dodging his attack, repaying the debt for the blow she received earlier. "The same move won't work twice." Kenjaku said this, and just as everything was proceeding as she expected, Maki Zenin, who was behind her, did not choose to charge forward with her Chidori, but instead opened her mouth. "Chinatsu-sensei. You're here." "Huh?" A huge red exclamation mark and 3 large black question marks instantly popped up above Kenjaku's head. Although it was impossible, she was shocked by Maki's words for a split second. At the same time, the punch thrown by Itadori Yuji continued to close in on Kenjaku. By the time Kenjaku reacted, Itadori Yuji's fist was less than 1 centimeter from her head. Asterisk bang. Asterisk. Itadori Yuji's righteous family smiting punch struck Kenjaku straight in the face. Kenjaku looked like a cartoon character. Her face seemed momentarily dented from the impact. Kenjaku was sent flying like a rubber ball. If she could, she would have liked to land as gracefully as possible, but she couldn't manage it, and instead rolled several times on the ground. Cough, cough, cough. Kenjaku, her face covered in dust, slowly climbed back to her feet. From 1,000 years ago until now, she had only experienced being hit directly in the face twice. The first time was when she tried to kill the undeveloped Rikugan in its cradle, and was subsequently counter-killed. The second time was now. Kenjaku got up from the ground, vigorously shaking her head from side to side, her face clearly showing the word displeased. The speed of forming the hand signs for domain expansion was certainly slower than Aoi Todu's clapping speed. Although she was confident in close-quarters combat, her opponents had the advantage of numbers. That's truly disgusting. Kenjaku involuntarily voiced this complaint. She began seriously considering how she should deal with the trio, Boogie Woogie, Tiger of West Middle, and Heavenly Restriction Little Tyrant. And soon she looked up again. The concentration of cursed energy in the air had reached a specific critical point. Although Kenjaku wasn't sure if it was enough, she felt she could take the gamble. Curse technique reversal, gravity manipulation. Kenjaku maximized the performance of her gravity curse technique. After briefly restraining Aoi Todu, Itadori Yuji and Maki Zenin, she began chanting the incantation to herself. The net of compassion. The rope of salvation. Transcend the world. Liberation and freedom. Cross the far shore. Go to the pure land. Fulfill the 6 perfections. Guide all sentient beings. Chapter 127. The ladder leads to Buddhahood. Strange incantations, one after another, spilled from Kenjaku's mouth. These were the specific incantations she had adjusted for this ritual, representing her greatest sincerity. The massive cursed energy swirling above the entire country did not quickly gather toward Kenjaku's location like a spirit bomb. Instead, faint, fragmented lines appeared on Kenjaku's body. Her cursed energy, mixed with her soul, leaked out little by little from these broken lines, floating toward the eerie sky above. Time flowed by minute. Although Maki Zenin couldn't see this bizarre sight because she wasn't wearing cursed tool glasses, she still felt the sinister and eerie aura, which made her uneasy. Hey, what exactly is happening? Maki Zenin couldn't help but turn her head and quickly shout the question toward Yuji Itadori and Aoi Todu, but neither of them could answer her. It was truly too bizarre. Sweat dripped down Aoi Todu's cheeks. The part of him that was a normal human warned him to run immediately, while the part that was a jujutsu sorcerer told him to quickly stop Kenjaku, or else a huge problem would arise. Compromising, Aoi Todu decided to let Yuji Itadori and Maki Zenin leave first to report the situation, while he stayed here to figure out a way to stop Kenjaku. Bro. Aoi Todu had only gotten one word out when he realized that Yuji Itadori beside him was already gritting his teeth, enduring the pressure of the gravity, and stepping toward Kenjaku. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The gravitational pressure emanating from Kenjaku was immense agony even for the superhuman high schooler Yuji Itadori. His entire body constantly emitted the sound of bones cracking, and blood even seeped out from beneath his skin, yet he did not stop his advance. Kenjaku, who had stopped moving. Yuji, who was advancing. More than 10 seconds later, Yuji Itadori arrived less than an arm's length in front of Kenjaku. Gritting his teeth, he clenched his fist and amidst roars of anger, landed a punch squarely on Kenjaku's face. Bang! The scene where Kenjaku was sent flying with an abstract face and saliva, as imagined, did not happen. Instead, Yuji Itadori's punch hitting Kenjaku's face felt like striking something fragile. Kenjaku's body instantly disintegrated along those fragmented lines. The cursed energy accompanying her soul transformed into a chaotic black mist, surging massively and vertically upward. Yuji Itadori unconsciously raised his head, unsure if he was hallucinating, but as he looked at the pillar of cursed energy rushing toward the sky, he seemed to hear Kenjaku's manic laughter. Finally, I finally succeeded. Even if heaven doesn't favor me or stand on my side, so what? I, Kenjaku, can still defy fate and change destiny. Kenjaku's soul and cursed energy blended into the cursed energy swirling in the sky. It wasn't one side dominating this powerful force, but rather an equal assimilation using self and the masses as two separate units. Under normal circumstances, this would be impossible. However, if a binding vow of sufficient strength built a resilient bridge between the two parties, then this impossibility would become possible. A chaotic vortex expanded in the sky, and the bone-chilling aura transformed into waves of air that swept out in all directions. Yuji Itadori and the others were nearly blown off their feet by the air waves. After stabilizing themselves, they decided not to continue the fight, instead reaching into their pockets for their phones. They called Chinatsu. Beep beep beep. Unanswered. Chinatsu-sensei didn't answer. Then call her younger brother. Another call was placed, this time to Chinatsu's younger brother, Satoru Gojo. However, just like the call to Chinatsu, after a series of beeps, the answer they received was that the party did not pick up. This is truly bad now. Left with no choice, Aoi To-do raised his phone, switched to camera mode, and prepared to take a picture of the abnormality in front of him, intending to post it in the temporary group chat established for the Jujutsu sorcerers community. He couldn't rely on the ordinary Jujutsu sorcerers at all. To be honest, he felt he couldn't rely on any Jujutsu sorcerers other than Chinatsu and Satoru Gojo, but since the calls weren't going through, this was all he could do for now. But before he could press the shutter button, the scene he was aiming at changed once again, and the resulting transformation left him stunned in shock. He watched as the chaotic cursed energy began to spiral, converging and taking shape. It constantly shifted through various monstrous outlines before finally transforming into a humanoid silhouette. When quantitative change leads to qualitative change, that qualitative change will once again lead to quantitative change. The cursed energy cycling in the sky according to this rule began to undergo a fundamental change. In the original work, Sukuna summoned the Shikigami Maharaga, using its adaptive analysis ability to find a way to break through Limitless defense. The action Maharaga took after its first adaptive analysis was to mutate the form of its cursed energy, turning it into a new type of energy different from cursed energy, thus bypassing the Limitless defense based on cursed energy. And now something similar was happening on Kenjaku's side. When such immense cursed energy mutated into a completely new energy form, the life born from it was undoubtedly an ultimate entity transcending both humans and cursed spirits. Under the gaze of Yuji Itadori and the others, the brand new Kenjaku finally began to reveal her new form, towering over the world with a massive stature. A celestial crown rested upon her head, and a jeweled necklace adorned her chest. Her whole body shimmered with golden light, possessing 3 faces and 8 arms. Her faces were benevolent and kind, and a red glow hung between her brows. It was difficult to associate this appearance with the role of a villain. If one looked into Buddhist scriptures concerning these forms, one might even find that this was the descent of a divine Buddha. Amagapasa Lokshvara Bodhisattva. The lasso of compassion. The cord of salvation. Salvation for all sentient beings. The vow is not empty. Aoi To-do couldn't help but mutter the details related to the famous Amagapasa Bodhisattva from Buddhist scriptures. Although he already knew this dangerous person was named Kenjaku, a simple name coincidence shouldn't mean anything. But now, seriously, I understand less and less what is happening. Is she an enemy or a friend? Is she really a living Buddha? How is this possible? Aoi To-do muttered darkly. At the same time, the body of this giant Buddha-like form gradually became transparent, but under the illumination of the dazzling Buddha light, Yuji and the others had already lost the desire to fight. And in the final moment before the Buddha-like form completely vanished, the originally benevolent and smiling face suddenly showed a sinister abnormality, instantly transforming her smile from that of a benevolent Buddha to that of a demon. Chapter 128, Siblings Reunite. Meanwhile, on Chinatsu's battlefield, 2 loud explosions echoed. It turned out to be the collision between Chinatsu's curse technique lapse, blue, and Sukuna's fire arrow. On one side, countless sparks flew in the air, while on the other, countless shattered stones were scattered. Chinatsu waved her hand to disperse the sparks in the air. Sukuna was blasted back nearly 10 meters. However, where there's smoke, there's no injury. White smoke from the reverse curse technique gradually wafted from Sukuna's body, meaning the previous battles had only served to deplete his energy. Until this moment, both sides remained unharmed. This is why reverse cursed technique is called the core of cursed energy. Jujutsu sorcerers who can use it and those who cannot are on completely different levels, with a world of difference in their combat dynamics. It seems we'll have to fight for a while longer. Sukuna spoke casually while stretching his grotesque body. He was a thrill-seeker, and now Chinatsu had given him the greatest thrill he'd experienced so far, so he naturally wouldn't miss it. Every minute, every second was an enjoyment. Sukuna once again adopted a fighting stance. Seeing this, Chinatsu quickly raised her fists. She stated that she had figured out Sukuna's attack patterns, and as long as she concentrated, she would definitely seize the moment to defeat Sukuna again. The two stared at each other. Just as both were about to burst forward and charge at each other, a strong sense of incongruity surged from behind Chinatsu. Through the omnidirectional vision granted by her Rikugan, Chinatsu could see the truth of that strong incongruity behind her even without turning around. The Kenjaku, who had gradually disappeared from Itadori's side, was now slowly appearing behind Chinatsu. The face that should have displayed the standard benevolent gaze of a deity instead wore a demonic smile. Kenjaku. Kenjaku's figure instantly appeared in Chinatsu's mind. She understood that Kenjaku's plan had most likely succeeded, although she wasn't sure how she had done it, perhaps by paying some huge price. After only a very brief thought, Sukuna, who was in front of Chinatsu, suddenly burst forward, launching a fierce offensive against Chinatsu with his 4 fists. Although Kenjaku is disgusting, are you looking down on me by getting distracted right in front of me? Sukuna grinned, launching a direct frontal assault. Chinatsu immediately regained her focus and swung her fists to counter him. Although 2 fists are no match for 4 hands, Chinatsu was not much inferior in close combat. If she were to abandon her identity as a jujutsu sorcerer and compete in an international boxing match with this set of boxing techniques, the match would probably be over as soon as the referee said begin. Kenjaku, transformed into a deity, looked down on everything from above. In her eyes, both Chinatsu and Sukuna were like ants. Now I can do anything. Kenjaku could feel her original consciousness changing. Perhaps in a few more minutes she would no longer be herself. However, she didn't care about this at all. Her consciousness might change, but the will within this consciousness would continue to exist in various forms. She slowly raised one of her palms, which glowed with golden light, so massive that it could treat skyscrapers as toys in its hand. A seemingly slow but actually swift palm strike swung downwards, ready to personally teach a lesson to the shameful war criminal who had once punched her in the face. Gojo Chinatsu. Sukuna below also felt the rule of a seemingly simple but actually inescapable attack. This surprised and angered Sukuna a bit, because judging by the size of Kenjaku's palm, he too would take a hit if it landed. You really need a beating. Since you've done what you wanted to do, our binding vow is also resolved. Once I deal with this girl, you're next. Sukuna thought this, then leaped backward while raising his hands to draw his bow and shoot an arrow again. Open. In front was Sukuna's fire arrow. Behind was Kenjaku's Buddha palm. Chinatsu's eyes darkened. Just as she was thinking that she could only go all out and use that one move, a familiar person, too familiar to be unfamiliar, suddenly appeared within her sensory range. Her previously sunken eyes relaxed, and a faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. She raised one hand, making a finger gun gesture. The crimson bullet released from her fingertip and the flaming arrow shot from the drawn bow instantly collided, creating a powerful explosion. At the same time, the hand of the deity Kenjaku, whom Chinatsu almost ignored behind her, did not remain still, constantly closing in on Chinatsu. And it was at this moment, in midair between Kenjaku's hand and Chinatsu, a man with a maniacal smile was making an exaggerated motion to wind up a punch. Phase. Light dusk. Eye of wisdom. Curse technique lapse, blue maximum output. Chants of curse technique flowed from his mouth, and the maximum output of blue wrapped around his tightly clenched fist. Swish! With a sharp whooshing sound, Gojo Satoru's fist, fully charged, swung out and directly collided with the huge palm of the deity Kenjaku. Black flash. The lucky black flash bloomed here, exceptionally conspicuous against the backdrop of Kenjaku's golden glowing palm. Cracks appeared on Kenjaku's deity palm, and the impact of Gojo Satoru's blow caused her body to tilt backward. Gojo Satoru, with a swaggering expression that greatly annoyed Kenjaku, slowly descended from midair after the punch, finally landing gently behind Chinatsu. "Older sister, did I make it in time?" "Humph, not bad." Gojo Satoru smiled, his demeanor completely relaxed, as if he wasn't in a dangerous battlefield but a tourist attraction. This was immense confidence, not just his confidence in himself, but also his confidence in the chemical reaction created when he teamed up with his older sister. It should be noted that he had never fought alongside his older sister before. The closest they came was against Fushiguro Toji, but that time his older sister was ambushed and defeated individually, so it didn't count as a team-up. After awakening his invincibility, there was even less to say, as the power disparity in modern times was too severe. Let alone teaming up, there were only a few people who could even hold their own in a one-on-one fight on their side. Gojo Satoru was somewhat excited. Chinatsu beside him showed a relieved smile. Then both of them, without prior agreement, turned to face Sukuna, selectively ignoring the deity Kenjaku behind them. Clear objective. Quick resolution as a team. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru stood shoulder to shoulder, clenching their fists. Sukuna, opposite them, furrowed his brow, and an ominous premonition surged from his heart. Chapter 129. Siblings Join Forces. Kenjaku's hand, struck by Gojo Satoru's black flash, was still trembling slightly. A body composed of the cursed energy gathered from hundreds of millions of people was actually shaken by the attack of a single individual. Rikugan? No, it's not just the Rikugan. Even throughout the history of the Six Eyes, they are transcendent beings, as if they were obstacles specifically placed by heaven to stop me. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Kenjaku slowly and forcefully clenched his palm, which had been left somewhat numb by Gojo Satoru's black flash. The minor fissures and damage sustained during the collision were recovering at a visible rate, yet without the rising mist that accompanies the activation of reverse curse technique. At the same time, Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru temporarily ignored Kenjaku behind them and launched a joint surprise attack against Sukuna. Although the two had never teamed up before and had no practice or rehearsal, they displayed extraordinary synergy. They didn't even need body language to signal what the other intended to do. Everything was completely spontaneous and natural. Curse technique lapse, blue barrage. Gojo Satoru concentrated and raised both hands, and dozens of blue spheres like flames and light appeared all around Sukuna. Sukuna tensed his cheeks. The moment the blue spheres rushed toward him, he seized the opportunity to leap, attempting to evade the attack, unaware that Chinatsu had already discerned his escape route and appeared there. Chinatsu raised a foot and quickly lashed out toward Sukuna's face. Although Sukuna quickly reacted and raised his arm to defend, he was still kicked flying to the ground by Chinatsu. After Sukuna rolled once on the ground, he tried to quickly get up, but Chinatsu did not give him the chance. Her foot descended rapidly toward him like a battle axe. Bang! 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 Faced with Chinatsu's battle axe stomps, Sukuna could only continue rolling awkwardly on the ground for several more rotations. Before he could climb back up, he suddenly realized he seemed to be rising. The section of flooring where Sukuna was rolling suddenly lifted up as Chinatsu raised her finger, carrying Sukuna upwards. What is she trying to do? This question flashed through Sukuna's mind, but before he could figure out the reason, the next surprise arrived. Another massive reinforced concrete slab, manipulated by Gojo Satoru, appeared directly above Sukuna. Like a meat sandwich, the two enormous slabs imbued with cursed energy clamped Sukuna between them, causing a violent collision. Countless pieces of rebar and concrete flew through the air, and thick smoke billowed skyward. The battered Sukuna slowly fell downwards. More than physical injury, he was mentally frustrated. Annoying. Extremely annoying. If it were a clash of bodies or cursed techniques, attacks that could cause substantial damage would be acceptable, but this pincer attack using reinforced concrete seemed too childish. Sukuna felt as if he were being played with by Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, and this was what annoyed him the most. Frowning, Sukuna slowly descended through the air. This process was surprisingly quiet. The two who had been attacking like a storm actually allowed him this much time to breathe. Something is wrong. When Sukuna landed on the ground, his 4 eyes split into 2 pairs, looking left and right. The surrounding dust obscured his vision but did not hinder Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru's sight. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru stood on Sukuna's left and right sides, respectively, each making a different hand sign and opening their lips, uttering a low incantation. Blue and red energy quickly condensed in their hands. Phase/phase. Twilight/jackfruit. Eye of wisdom/pillar of light. Different incantations were rapidly and clearly uttered from their mouths, and hearing the voices coming from both sides, Sukuna immediately became alert. The invocation of cursed energy. The chanting of incantations. Are they charging up? A few seconds later. Curse technique lapse, blue like blue flames. Curse technique reversal, red, scarlet and scorching. An overwhelming aura of cursed energy swept in from both sides. Sukuna, having been alerted beforehand, stomped his foot on the ground and safely evaded both attacks, just as he predicted. Yet a sense of unease still lingered in his heart. It felt as if the danger had not been averted, but was instead drawing closer. Sukuna, who had leaped backward after pushing off the ground, clearly witnessed the high-speed curse technique lapse, blue and curse technique reversal, red about to collide where he had just been standing. About to? Collide? Wait. Sukuna suddenly realized the truth. He abruptly widened his eyes, his pupils trembling like an earthquake. With astonishing reaction speed, he made the optimal choice for the current situation. Domain amplification. A layer of neutralizing membrane covered Sukuna's entire body. This move could not only grant oneself a sure-hit effect, but could also be used to increase defensive power by neutralizing the effects of others' curse techniques. A normal curse technique lapse, blue could be withstood, and even taking curse technique reversal, red head-on wouldn't cause much damage. Unfortunately, the attack before him was neither curse technique lapse, blue nor curse technique reversal, red, nor was it normal. Hollow technique, purple unlimited. The moment curse technique lapse, blue and curse technique reversal, red collided, intense attraction and repulsion forces violently clashed. The collision and fusion technique, originally completed between the hands, was executed remotely in a brutal manner. Instantly, a brilliant starlight-like radiance blossomed near Sukuna. The sheer destructive power was self-evident. Even Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, standing a distance away on either side, were affected by the blast of their own attack. The foundation of limitless defense is limitless power, and hollow technique. Purple is reinforced limitless power. Since the latter power was of the same nature but stronger than the former, both Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, the ones who released the technique, sustained damage. Fortunately, the damage was minor. As the earth-shattering roar gradually subsided, mist from the activation of reverse curse technique wafted from Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru's bodies, while they raised their hands and gave a slight wave toward the air. Sukuna, who was affected by the close-range explosion of hollow technique, Purple, barely managed to survive due to the strength of his body and his excellent judgment in timely activating domain amplification. However, all 4 of his arms were blown off, and his entire body was riddled with holes. Countless perforations through his flesh were clearly visible, and the composure that had originally been on his face completely vanished, replaced by a ferocious expression of rage. Although he still had the ability to use reverse cursed technique to heal, the efficiency of the healing had already decreased. Moreover, he didn't believe those 2 would give him time to heal. After furiously shouting, "Damn it!" in his heart, he abruptly raised his head and glared fiercely at a certain person who was watching the show nearby, seemingly mocking him, and let out a roar. Kenjaku. Chapter 130 Siblings Join Forces. Kenjaku's hand, struck by Gojo Satoru's black flash, was still trembling slightly. A body composed of the cursed energy gathered from hundreds of millions of people was actually shaken by the attack of a single individual. Rikugan? No, it's not just the Rikugan. Even throughout the history of the 6 eyes, they are transcendent beings, as if they were obstacles specifically placed by heaven to stop me. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! Kenjaku slowly and forcefully clenched his palm, which had been left somewhat numb by Gojo Satoru's black flash. The minor fissures and damage sustained during the collision were recovering at a visible rate, yet without the rising mist that accompanies the activation of reverse curse technique. At the same time, Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru temporarily ignored Kenjaku behind them and launched a joint surprise attack against Sukuna. Although the two had never teamed up before and had no practice or rehearsal, they displayed extraordinary synergy. They didn't even need body language to signal what the other intended to do. Everything was completely spontaneous and natural. Curse technique lapse, blue barrage. Gojo Satoru concentrated and raised both hands, and dozens of blue spheres like flames and light appeared all around Sukuna. Sukuna tensed his cheeks. The moment the blue spheres rushed toward him, he seized the opportunity to leap, attempting to evade the attack, unaware that Chinatsu had already discerned his escape route and appeared there. Chinatsu raised a foot and quickly lashed out toward Sukuna's face. Although Sukuna quickly reacted and raised his arm to defend, he was still kicked flying to the ground by Chinatsu.
Look, if you've actually made it this far into the video and you're still here, come on then, hit subscribe. And honestly, if you think a friend of yours would like this, go on and share it with them. It really helps out. Right, I'm done. I'll get out of your hair now so you can get back to the good stuff. But seriously, stick around till the end. It's well worth it.
After Sukuna rolled once on the ground, he tried to quickly get up, but Chinatsu did not give him the chance. Her foot descended rapidly toward him like a battle axe. Bang! 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 Faced with Chinatsu's battle axe stomps, Sukuna could only continue rolling awkwardly on the ground for several more rotations. Before he could climb back up, he suddenly realized he seemed to be rising. The section of flooring where Sukuna was rolling suddenly lifted up as Chinatsu raised her finger, carrying Sukuna upwards. What is she trying to do? This question flashed through Sukuna's mind, but before he could figure out the reason, the next surprise arrived. Another massive reinforced concrete slab, manipulated by Gojo Satoru, appeared directly above Sukuna. Like a meat sandwich, the two enormous slabs imbued with cursed energy clamped Sukuna between them, causing a violent collision. Countless pieces of rebar and concrete flew through the air, and thick smoke billowed skyward. The battered Sukuna slowly fell downwards. More than physical injury, he was mentally frustrated. Annoying. Extremely annoying. If it were a clash of bodies or cursed techniques, attacks that could cause substantial damage would be acceptable, but this pincer attack using reinforced concrete seemed too childish. Sukuna felt as if he were being played with by Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, and this was what annoyed him the most. Frowning, Sukuna slowly descended through the air. This process was surprisingly quiet. The two who had been attacking like a storm actually allowed him this much time to breathe. Something is wrong. When Sukuna landed on the ground, his four eyes split into two pairs, looking left and right. The surrounding dust obscured his vision but did not hinder Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru's sight. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru stood on Sukuna's left and right sides, respectively, each making a different hand sign and opening their lips, uttering a low incantation. Blue and red energy quickly condensed in their hands. Phase/phase. Twilight/jackfruit. Eye of wisdom/pillar of light. Different incantations were rapidly and clearly uttered from their mouths, and hearing the voices coming from both sides, Sukuna immediately became alert. The invocation of cursed energy. The chanting of incantations. Are they charging up? A few seconds later. Curse technique lapse, blue like blue flames. Curse technique reversal, red, scarlet and scorching. An overwhelming aura of cursed energy swept in from both sides. Sukuna, having been alerted beforehand, stomped his foot on the ground and safely evaded both attacks, just as he predicted. Yet, a sense of unease still lingered in his heart. It felt as if the danger had not been averted, but was instead drawing closer. Sukuna, who had leaped backward after pushing off the ground, clearly witnessed the high-speed curse technique lapse, blue and curse technique reversal, red about to collide where he had just been standing. About to? Collide? Wait! Sukuna suddenly realized the truth. He abruptly widened his eyes, his pupils trembling like an earthquake. With astonishing reaction speed, he made the optimal choice for the current situation. Domain amplification. A layer of neutralizing membrane covered Sukuna's entire body. This move could not only grant oneself a sure-hit effect, but could also be used to increase defensive power by neutralizing the effects of others' curse techniques. A normal curse technique lapse, blue could be withstood, and even taking curse technique reversal, red head-on wouldn't cause much damage. Unfortunately, the attack before him was neither curse technique lapse, blue nor curse technique reversal, red, nor was it normal. Hollow technique, purple unlimited. The moment curse technique lapse, blue and curse technique reversal, red collided, intense attraction and repulsion forces violently clashed. The collision and fusion technique, originally completed between the hands, was executed remotely in a brutal manner. Instantly, a brilliant starlight-like radiance blossomed near Sukuna. The sheer destructive power was self-evident. Even Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, standing a distance away on either side, were affected by the blast of their own attack. The foundation of limitless defense is limitless power, and hollow technique. Purple is reinforced limitless power. Since the latter power was of the same nature but stronger than the former, both Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, the ones who released the technique, sustained damage. Fortunately, the damage was minor. As the earth-shattering roar gradually subsided, mist from the activation of reverse curse technique wafted from Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru's bodies, while they raised their hands and gave a slight wave toward the air. Sukuna, who was affected by the close-range explosion of hollow technique, Purple, barely managed to survive due to the strength of his body and his excellent judgment in timely activating domain amplification. However, all 4 of his arms were blown off, and his entire body was riddled with holes. Countless perforations through his flesh were clearly visible, and the composure that had originally been on his face completely vanished, replaced by a ferocious expression of rage. Although he still had the ability to use reverse cursed technique to heal, the efficiency of the healing had already decreased. Moreover, he didn't believe those 2 would give him time to heal. After furiously shouting, "Damn it!" in his heart, he abruptly raised his head and glared fiercely at a certain person who was watching the show nearby, seemingly mocking him, and let out a roar. Kenjaku. Chapter 130 The Battle. The combined combat power of Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru brought immense pressure to the King of Curses from 1,000 years ago. This was no longer mere tension, he genuinely felt incredibly close to death just now. Sukuna enjoyed killing, using it as a stepping stone to create fun for himself. This was a one-sided pleasure. He disliked the taste of death, as he was always the one to bestow that taste upon others. Following Sukuna's ferocious cry of Kenjaku, Kenjaku, with his divine Buddha form, revealed a subtle expression, then helplessly raised both hands and brought them together. If he could, he would have loved to watch the spectacle of Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru jointly beating Sukuna, but he also knew that if Sukuna were dealt with like this, then he would be the one to be jointly beaten next. Thinking of this, Kenjaku couldn't help but inwardly scoff at the absurdity. Before he took a black flash from Gojo Satoru, he believed himself to be invincible. Never mind 2 Rikugan, he could handle 7 or 8 Rikugan. Tisk. Kenjaku transformed his grief and indignation into motivation. With his hands clasped together, a black line suddenly shot upwards from the top of his Buddha form's head. The black line continuously extended upwards until it entered an altitude difficult for the naked eye to perceive. Upon reaching its apex, it instantly split into countless fine black threads. Ultimately, each thread plunged vertically into the heads of 100 million ordinary citizens across the country, excluding jujutsu sorcerers, who had contributed large amounts of negative cursed energy. The divine Buddha Kenjaku connected himself to ordinary people through these black lines, and his physical information would be continuously output into these ordinary people's bodies. Assuming Kenjaku was the host of a supercomputer and ordinary people were individual regular computers, these black lines would be the data cables connecting them, with the host constantly injecting new data into the branching ordinary computers. It wouldn't take long for these ordinary computers to receive the brand new data transmitted from the supercomputer, and the ordinary computers would undergo a major version update. In Kenjaku's current state, once the version update was complete, ordinary people across the country would also transform into a similar state. A brand new ultimate species would appear on this planet, completely disrupting its order. Come on, if you can stop it, try. Kenjaku slightly raised his head, and the golden divine Buddha form suddenly twisted slightly. In this brief distortion, a hideous demonic body was revealed. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, possessing the Rikugan, saw this scene clearly. Although they had not believed Kenjaku had truly achieved Buddhahood before, seeing this demonic form still made goosebumps rise on their skin simultaneously. Older sister. Yes, I understand. Their eyes met, they simply exchanged a brief glance and understood each other's intentions. Although eliminating Sukuna was a high priority, if Kenjaku's assimilation were to complete, it would lead to an irreversible outcome. However, it was still necessary to deal with Sukuna first to confidently take on Kenjaku. Their opinions were unanimous. Their gazes once again firmly focused on Sukuna, who was secretly and quickly healing himself with reverse cursed technique. At this moment, Sukuna was shrouded in rolling mist, his once riddled body mostly healed. But when the siblings' gazes fell upon him, his expression involuntarily dropped. As the mighty king of curses, he had no confidence whatsoever in withstanding a second wave of attacks with the same rhythm as before. He gritted his teeth and glared at Kenjaku again. Sukuna, Kenjaku! Kenjaku, don't rush. The three-faced, eight-armed divine Buddha Kenjaku's pupils radiated brilliant golden light, and his lips parted, emitting the Fuku Shingen in a chanting, sutra-like tone. Chinatsu, come here. In just a brief moment, Chinatsu felt as if her body wasn't her own. Her steps, originally poised to rush towards Sukuna, reversed 180 degrees, and she turned to quickly charge towards Kenjaku. Cursed speech. Gojo Satoru, witnessing this, showed a shocked expression. His first thought was of the cursed speech jujutsu of the renowned Inumaki family in the jujutsu world. Yes, but not entirely. Just as Gojo Satoru was shocked and contemplating his older sister's sudden departure, the king of curses, Sukuna, who had barely healed his body, seized this moment. He raised both hands and quickly formed a hand seal. Domain expansion, malevolent shrine. Instantly, a shrine filled with ominousness, ferocity, and distortion rose from beneath Sukuna's feet. Countless white bone skeletons appeared all around, and an eerie cold wind swept in all directions. This was Sukuna's second domain expansion since his failed domain clash with Chinatsu. His expression was solemn now, devoid of the carefree arrogance he had displayed upon his initial revival. However, he intended to regain his confidence with this domain expansion. After all, an open-type domain was no cheap commodity. It was one thing for someone to awaken and learn it by observing on the spot, but it couldn't be that he also. Just as Sukuna thought this, he saw Gojo Satoru, like Chinatsu when she first saw his domain, not opening his own domain. Instead, he slightly lowered his body, adopting a sword-drawing stance. New shadow style, simple domain. A sacred, inviolable pure land appeared beneath his feet, and he himself, full of interest, admired the structure of Sukuna's domain with his azure eyes. So this is the open-type domain older sister once mentioned. Is this how it's achieved? Gojo Satoru murmured softly, but even his quiet voice reached Sukuna's ears. These words, almost identical to Chinatsu's, instantly broke his composure, and he almost couldn't resist bursting into curses. Although Sukuna ultimately held back, as Sukuna observed Gojo Satoru, the latter was also paying attention to him. What was wrong with Sukuna? Wait, Sukuna was fighting older sister before, right? As the ultimate technique of a jujutsu sorcerer, it's very normal for high-level battles to involve domain clashes. When I arrived, the two sides were clearly in a stalemate, so it's impossible that a domain battle hadn't occurred yet, which means the domain battle had already ended by the time I arrived. But Sukuna's domain is an open-type domain, which has an absolute counter-effect against ordinary closed-type domains. No matter how powerful older sister's domain effect is, if the domain's outer shell is shattered, it's useless. Yet the result is that older sister was unharmed and even held a slight advantage. What does this mean? This question lingered in Gojo Satoru's mind for only 2 or 3 seconds before he found the answer, and his expression at once became quite remarkable. Older sister has already grasped an open-type domain? Chapter 131. Brother, my grand plan has failed again. Although this wasn't the first or second time it had failed, every time the flame was extinguished, Gojo Satoru's obsession would cause that thought to rekindle and rise again, which is why he was repeatedly struck down. Gojo Satoru couldn't help but turn his head to look behind him, attempting to vent his current emotions to his older sister, but Sukuna, seeing this, gritted his teeth and charged straight over, unleashing a powerful punch. Bang! The momentum was unparalleled. Although Sukuna didn't speak, the words he wanted to convey were as if etched onto his face. That girl was distracted while fighting me. You brat are also distracted while fighting me. Sukuna's sudden punch almost hit Gojo Satoru's face, but fortunately Gojo Satoru reacted at the last second and dodged by twisting his body. Sukuna's fist grazed past his cheek, and after he dodged, Sukuna's next wave of attacks quickly swept in. The simple domain beneath his feet was being continuously pressured by Sukuna's domain at an alarming rate, and it would likely completely collapse in less than 10 seconds. Gojo Satoru refocused his attention from his older sister, understanding that he had to quickly catch up to her progress, just like before. Closed domain and open domain. If domain power is a liquid, then a closed domain is like constructing an outer shell to contain this liquid within a perfectly sealed container. Why is an open domain a divine technique? It's based on the aforementioned point. Even without a container, the liquid can remain gathered and concentrated. Years ago, when Chinatsu proposed the theory of the open domain to Gojo Satoru, he was stunned on the spot, thinking this is impossible, while simultaneously contemplating how to achieve this theory. Although Gojo Satoru didn't know where to start researching the open domain at the time, since it was a serious idea proposed by his older sister, Gojo Satoru believed in his heart that this theory indeed had the possibility of realization and thus delved into its study. Gojo Satoru, like Chinatsu, was like a precise machine running normally, missing one final gear. After witnessing Sukuna's open domain firsthand, this last gear was rapidly being conjured out of thin air and embedded within him. Seeing Gojo Satoru's focused, almost lost-in-thought expression, Sukuna's ominous feeling grew stronger. His 4 arms with 4 fists furiously pounded Gojo Satoru's body, sweeping over him like a storm. Simple domain open. Simple domain shatter. Falling flower guard open. Falling flower guard break. Reverse curse technique activate. Infinite slashes graze. Large amounts of crimson blood splattered from Gojo Satoru's body, corresponding to numerous wounds on him and constantly gushing, rising mist. High-frequency activation of reverse curse technique consumes an extreme amount of cursed energy and mental stamina. Even with the Rikugan, which minimizes cursed energy consumption, mental exhaustion is unavoidable. However, Gojo Satoru felt fine about it, as he often activated this level of reverse curse technique when training with his older sister. He wasn't playing around, and neither was his older sister. Looking at Gojo Satoru, who had not yet grasped the open domain, Sukuna's sense of unease gradually faded, and his usual smile reappeared. That's more like it. If everyone could quickly grasp the open domain, then how could it be described as a miraculous technique? Only a few jujutsu sorcerers I know have mastered it. Sukuna, having regained his confidence, intentionally or unintentionally reduced the output of his slashes, as if to conserve and recover his state, preparing for his upcoming revenge battle against Chinatsu. But at the moment he intentionally or unintentionally reduced his slashes, Gojo Satoru, as if finally able to catch his breath, seized the opportunity and, with astonishing speed, made the single-hand gesture for domain combat. Domain expansion, unlimited void. Like ink splattered on the scroll of the sky, Gojo Satoru's cursed energy instantly spread within Sukuna's domain. A crystal-clear ink-wash-like domain sphere enveloped Sukuna, floating above the ground. Gojo Satoru's unlimited void is a sure-hit specialized domain. In terms of domain effect alone, describing it as the best is no exaggeration. An ordinary person, even if affected for 0.2 seconds, would instantly become a vegetable and lie in a hospital bed for several months. Even a disaster-cursed spirit of that level would fall into a long slumber if affected for 0.2 seconds, an effect that made Sukuna himself wary. Sukuna was initially surprised to see Gojo Satoru suddenly expand his domain, but when he realized that Gojo Satoru had still only deployed a normal closed domain, he immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It's just a dying struggle. In an instant, overwhelming slashes attacked the outer shell of Gojo Satoru's domain. The outer shell of a closed domain is extremely fragile, it simply couldn't withstand such an assault, and soon cracks appeared, then it shattered like a crystal artwork. It's done. These 2 words flashed through Sukuna's mind. When a domain is broken or dispelled, the caster will automatically enter a state called curse technique reversal. In this state, the caster will be unable to use their innate technique. In Gojo Satoru's case, that means he would be unable to use the Limitless void. Without the defense of Limitless, Sukuna was confident he could kill Gojo Satoru before his curse technique reversal ended. Just as Sukuna was thinking this, he suddenly realized that the situation seemed to be different from what he had imagined. Pieces of the crystal-clear unlimited void domain shell floated in the air, Rather than dissipating, they seemed to dissolve into the air. All too well. Domain power contained without an outer shell, gathering without dispersing, dispersing without collapsing. This was undoubtedly the foundation of an open domain. Gojo Satoru completed the transformation of his domain's form at the moment his domain was shattered by Sukuna's slashes. He successfully seized the opportunity to step into a new world. Sukuna's gaze fell back onto Gojo Satoru. He saw that Gojo Satoru's hand gesture was no longer the single hand gesture he had used when first expanding his domain. His other hand was also raised, forming an overlapping gesture. The little fingers and ring fingers of both hands are joined inwards, the index fingers and thumbs are aligned, their tips touching. The middle fingers wrap around the index fingers, and the seal is pressed into the 5 points of the body. This is the 8-bat wheel. This hand seal possesses the power to break virtue and can destroy all obstacles on the path. It is the true and complete Marisai Heavenly Fundamental Seal. Gojo Satoru closed his eyes, his head tilted slightly downwards. After taking a deep breath, he raised his head, and his eyes, as blue as the sky stretching into the distance, reopened. Domain Transformation, Boundless. Chapter 132. The evolution from a closed domain to an open domain is by no means easy. It symbolizes a jujutsu sorcerer's attainment of the true pinnacle in their mastery of individual domains. In the modern era, those who can use domain expansion are as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. In ancient times, those who could use domain expansion were generally of average skill. Sukuna and Kenjaku, as those who have reached the realm of open domain expansion, view the world and maintain a mindset far beyond that of normal people. They believe this change is normal because they are strong and others are weak, allowing them to act as they please and arbitrarily dominate these weaklings, who are like mere pawns. Ultimately, Sukuna became a butcher. Kenjaku became a prankster. Sukuna thoroughly enjoys the pleasure derived from people's misery. Cannibalism isn't just a rumor, he genuinely opens his mouth to eat, and even has particular preferences for it. For example, he only wields the cleaver himself but isn't skilled at cooking, so his loyal servant Yuram steps in to serve him, which is what Sukuna is most satisfied with about Yuram. Although Kenjaku doesn't directly harm weaklings like Sukuna does, their core values are similar. For instance, he once encountered a woman with a special constitution during the Meiji era and forced her to become pregnant 9 times and abort 9 times, creating the cursed tool known as the cursed womb, death paintings, solely for his research into ultimate individuals. With these values, they arrived in the modern era from 1,000 years ago, intending to continue their way of life, but are now met with a strong impact from 2 modern jujutsu sorcerers. Domain Expansion, Unlimited Void. As Gojo Satoru formed the complete Marisai Heavenly Fundamental Seal, the domain power belonging to Gojo Satoru once again manifested and fiercely clashed with the domain power of Sukuna's malevolent shrine. Sukuna immediately gritted his teeth, attempting to increase his domain power to overpower Gojo Satoru's domain, aiming to defeat his opponent by winning the internal domain confrontation. However, he couldn't do it. The previous battle with Chinatsu was not in vain. Although cursed energy consumption could largely be ignored, other aspects could not. The healing efficiency of reverse cursed technique. The concentration of mind during battle. The precision of domain expansion. Sukuna had experienced a noticeable decline in all the above points due to consumption. Now, let alone increasing his domain precision to overpower Gojo Satoru, he couldn't even maintain a balance. If Gojo Satoru had held back and given Sukuna a chance, there might have been a possibility of a turnaround. Unfortunately, Gojo Satoru did not do so. Instead, he instantly went all out, increasing the domain's precision to its highest level and beyond. Instantly, black and white ink splattered across the heavens and earth. Unlike the single giant eye that automatically appears within a closed domain, the open domain expansion of Unlimited Void does not have that eye. Only Gojo Satoru's pair of Rikugan eyes, which seemed to glow. Sukuna's malevolent shrine was being rapidly covered and devoured at a visible rate. Seeing this, Sukuna felt that the situation was dire and decisively lifted his foot, preparing to flee. The advantages of an open domain expansion are obvious, but so are its disadvantages. Without a domain barrier, anyone trapped within only needs to escape the domain's range. The cursed tool, He-10 in his hand, grants him free soaring and extreme speed in the air. Although he had never used this ability for escape, he wouldn't throw a childish tantrum over mere dignity at this moment. Escape! This thought instantly filled Sukuna's mind. As he lifted his foot, he quickly twisted his body. Just a few seconds would be enough. He was confident he could escape the domain range a novice would extend when first deploying an open domain expansion. Indeed, Gojo Satoru was deploying an open domain expansion for the first time, and he lacked experience in terms of extension range, so he might not be able to expand the range very wide. However, when it comes to speed, Sukuna has never surpassed the instantaneous movement of a Rikugan user. The moment Sukuna turned and took a step, preparing to use Hiten, Gojo Satoru appeared like a phantom in his escape path, pressing one hand on the arm Sukuna held Hiten with. "Sukuna, you have nowhere to run. You brat!" Sukuna gritted his teeth and quickly struck Gojo Satoru with his other 3 arms. Although Gojo Satoru seemed to be frantically defending with one arm, it was actually Sukuna who was anxious. Every passing second indicated that Sukuna's time was running out, because his malevolent shrine was constantly being flattened by unlimited void. 11 seconds later, the malevolent shrine behind him had already been flattened and overtaken by unlimited void. The space beneath his feet and where his body stood was no longer under the jurisdiction of malevolent shrine, but the world of unlimited void. This world-changing sensation, even if Sukuna didn't observe the terrain or use cursed energy to assess the situation, he could feel it with the mere instinct of his body. Unlimited void hit. His eyes, which had been full of cunning calculations, instantly became murky, and all sorts of junk information instantly broke through his defenses and flooded into his brain. Looking at Sukuna in such a state, Gojo Satoru did not celebrate prematurely, because in his past battles with his older sister, he had lost several times due to celebrating prematurely. Of course, it might also have been Chinatsu's deliberate doing. Seeing this, Gojo Satoru merely clenched his fist, gathering his cursed energy at maximum power into his fist. At this moment, a subtle emotion welled up from the depths of Gojo Satoru's heart. This emotion did not hinder Gojo Satoru's performance. On the contrary, it made Gojo Satoru even more focused. The sound of friction from his clenched fist was very clear, and blue-white cursed energy wrapped around his iron fist. With a sharp whoosh, his fist solidly struck Sukuna's body. Bang! In an instant, black lightning burst forth in response. At this very moment, Sukuna's cursed energy defense, which originally covered his entire body, had ceased due to the effects of unlimited void. Even if this punch from Gojo Satoru didn't trigger Black Flash, it could easily break through his defense, let alone when it triggered Black Flash. If this were the original work, Sukuna might still have had a chance to reverse the outcome. After all, he was the hidden main character. But unfortunately, this was not the original work. It was a new future built and reversed little by Chinatsu from scratch. At this moment, the black lightning unleashed by Gojo Satoru's punch seemed to cheer for him, celebrating his continued future. With a bang, Sukuna's riddled body tilted backward and fell to the ground. The white mist symbolizing the activation of reverse curse technique for healing did not appear. This battle was Sukuna's defeat. Chapter 133, The Countdown to the End. Sukuna lay sprawled on the ground, his pupils unfocused. Even with his body riddled with holes, he still hadn't regained normal consciousness. The dominating effect of unlimited void continued to ceaselessly flood him with useless information. Reverse curse technique, activation impossible. The monstrous body continued to collapse. If this situation continued, even if Sukuna were left alone, he would soon turn to dust and vanish. That the king of curses from 1,000 years ago would meet such an end. If this were a fictional story, it would have been an incredibly funny joke in the Jujutsu world a millennium ago, one that Sukuna himself couldn't help but laugh heartily at. How absurd, wouldn't you say, Yuram? Sukuna said this with a chuckle, preparing to quietly listen to Yuram's reply. He believed Yuram's words would never disappoint him, as Yuram was his recognized most loyal subordinate, whose words always pleased him. But several seconds passed and the reply he expected from Yuram didn't come. Sukuna turned his head slightly in confusion to look beside him, but Yuram, who should have been there, was nowhere to be seen. The scene in his eyes suddenly shifted. The world he was in changed from the courtyard where he lived 1,000 years ago to a vast ocean, where he was tossed about by waves of useless information coming from all directions. At this moment it was impossible for him not to understand what was happening to him, but he also couldn't just calmly accept this reality. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! He gritted his teeth, attempting to use his tenacious willpower to resist the useless information from unlimited void, allowing his real-world self to regain consciousness and turn the tide of battle. He had the confidence to do so. And it was indeed possible. After all, he was the hidden main protagonist in the original work, more real than anyone in the main cast. However, Gojo Satoru, who was present, certainly didn't have the habit of celebrating prematurely. Even with Sukuna lying defeated before him, he remained terrifyingly cautious. This wasn't some grand principle learned from books, like pitying your enemy is being cruel to yourself, but valuable experience gained physically through battle after battle with his older sister. The corner of Sukuna's brow twitched above his clouded pupils, and if the view was pulled slightly upward, one could see two aligned fingers aimed directly at his glabella. Phase Paramitha Pillar of Light. Rapid and clearly articulated incantations spilled from Satoru Gojo's mouth, and accompanying the chanting was a crimson cursed energy bullet coalescing at the tip of the finger gun he extended. Curse technique reversal red. There were no words of farewell, only the chanting of incantations and the decisive strike fired immediately after the chanting concluded. Bang! A roar that seemed to pierce heaven and earth rang out, and rolling dust surged up, enveloping Satoru Gojo. As for Sukuna's body, which was directly hit, it naturally collapsed completely, unable to resist. The monstrous physique turned into countless fragments like shredded paper, scattering into the air with the rising dust, and finally dissipating completely. At this point, the king of curses from 1,000 years ago was truly unable to rise again. It cannot be said that anyone defeated him, but without a doubt, he was defeated by the hands of a modern jujutsu sorcerer, a mere small fry whom he had looked down upon. As he watched Sukuna completely dissipate, and before Satoru Gojo could feel any unusual emotion or utter an exclamation, violent explosions suddenly erupted behind him, each no less powerful than the red he used to finish Sukuna. Older sister. He sharply turned around to look at the battlefield behind him, only to see Kenjaku, who had transformed into a divine Buddha-like body, engaged in a highly fantastical battle with his older sister. Ice cone. Fireball. Electric light. Wind blade. Kenjaku utilized a variety of abilities, the strangeness of which nearly caused Chinatsu, who hadn't immediately reacted, to stumble. Of course, even Chinatsu, after reacting, still found Kenjaku's assault somewhat difficult to parry, because Kenjaku had changed the energy unit he was using, similar to Maharaga. The attacks she was using were neither cursed energy nor any form of energy recognized by humans on Earth, meaning limitless defense, which is based on cursed energy, could not recognize or defend against them. While dodging the attacks, Chinatsu looked towards the black line extending upward from Kenjaku's head. Although the information provided by the Rikugan was limited, she had a preliminary guess as to what Kenjaku had done. That's truly disgusting. After dodging a fireball rushing toward her, Chinatsu decisively retaliated with a red, but it was blocked by an ice shield that Kenjaku had frozen using an ice curse technique before it could hit her. Hearing Chinatsu's assessment of her, Kenjaku knew Chinatsu had guessed what she had done. Her expression shifted slightly, then she revealed a sickening smile. Chinatsu, you shouldn't be so smart. The reason Kenjaku could use so many different abilities now was precisely because of the black line extending upward from her head, which split and connected to the heads of 100 million people across the country. This black line connected her with 100 million people, allowing her to input her information to them, and those 100 million people would also input their information to her. The number of jujutsu sorcerers is very small, not only because few people host an innate technique within their bodies, but also because a portion of those who do host an innate technique cannot awaken it due to reasons like insufficient cursed energy. After Kenjaku connected with 100 million people, the cursed technique information of these potential jujutsu sorcerers was poured into Kenjaku's body, allowing Kenjaku to use these obscured abilities. All kinds of cursed technique abilities, coupled with the super-large capacity of cursed energy from 100 million people. This was Kenjaku's reliance, a powerful force that she originally believed could easily face 7 or 8 Rikugan users simultaneously. But now, despite Kenjaku relentlessly bombarding Chinatsu with all sorts of powers, it could, at most, only cause Chinatsu trouble. She clearly had gained the means to bypass defenses and thus should have been able to kill the divine child who possessed the Rikugan. Reality, however, was contrary to her wishes. This greatly puzzled Kenjaku, who could only continue to increase the firepower directed at Chinatsu. If the domain battle between Satoru Gojo and Sukuna could be described as high-end, grand, and classy, then the fight between Chinatsu and Kenjaku was utterly magnificent. Bang! 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 The sound of explosions continuously reverberated. If there was any other sound audible amidst such intense blasts, it was naturally the maniacal laughter emanating from Kenjaku. At this very moment, there were still 10 minutes remaining until the complete synchronization of her mental and physical information with the 100 million people. Chapter 134. Older Sister. Gojo Satoru watched in shock at the sight of destruction, blasted by Kenjaku. Due to the overwhelming amount of cursed energy, even with his Rikugan, he couldn't see through it to find his older sister. The qualitative change of cursed energy. Thus ignoring limitless defense. An abundance of cursed techniques, thus creating a tricky information gap. 100 million cursed energy, thus transforming into endless firepower. Kenjaku's maniacal laughter mixed with the sounds of explosive bombardment. Gojo Satoru clenched his fists, cursed energy swirling around them. Stop this! Just as Gojo Satoru was about to charge at Kenjaku, intending to force him to cease fire with an offensive strike, a hand appeared from behind him and rested on his shoulder. After a brief moment of surprise, Gojo Satoru instinctively turned his head, only to see his older sister, whom he had thought was in the center of the explosion, standing calmly right there. For a moment, Gojo Satoru's gaze flickered between the explosive chaos Kenjaku was unleashing and Chinatsu standing behind him, as if 3 large question marks had appeared above his head. Seeing Gojo Satoru's bewildered expression, Chinatsu couldn't help but let out a soft laugh, but she quickly cleared her throat and became serious again. Although Kenjaku had transformed into this divine Buddha-like body through assimilation with 100 million people, suddenly gaining such immense power was not without a price. With every passing second, Kenjaku's original consciousness became more unstable. The previous Kenjaku, though a prankster, at least had his own set of logical thoughts, but this logical framework was now gradually being stripped away. Chinatsu and Gojo had a countdown. Kenjaku also had a countdown. The difference was that Kenjaku didn't care about his own countdown. As long as his goal was achieved, the complete disappearance of his self-awareness was irrelevant. Chinatsu and Gojo, however, had to care about the countdown concerning the lives of 100 million people. As Chinatsu and Gojo pondered countermeasures with grave expressions, the crazed Kenjaku, who had been wildly attacking the air, finally calmed down slightly, turning his head to look at the two of them. "Are you two discussing tactics to defeat me? You can. I can give you time as much as you need." Kenjaku said this lightly. Chinatsu and Gojo naturally understood the true intention behind Kenjaku's words. After all, both sides were short on time, and giving time to the opponent also meant giving time to themselves. "Older sister, cooperate with me." All right." Hearing Gojo Satoru's words beside her, Chinatsu first gave him a quietly surprised glance, then nodded and gave a soft response. The two stood shoulder to shoulder. The last time they fought side by side was during their school days, facing the monster that appeared when Tengen's evolution went awry. Last time it was a close call, but they were safe. This time it would be the same. Curse technique lapse, blue maximum output. Chinatsu raised both her hands, her eyes fixed on Kenjaku, and clenched her raised hands tightly. Immediately, the entire surrounding area was affected by intense gravitational pull. Countless huge fragments were swept up, forming a chaotic tornado with the divine Buddha Kenjaku at its center. Kenjaku showed no panic at the sight. This technique, though seemingly terrifying, was merely one application of Limitless Void, blue. Compared to its outward appearance, the strength of this tornado was not optimistic. Disperse. Kenjaku once again activated an ability similar to cursed speech. The previously intense tornado immediately began to destabilize, its rotation speed gradually decreasing, downgrading from a tornado to a vortex. Countless clear gravitational spheres hung in various corners of the air, maintaining only the minimum amount of gravity to keep them stable. This somewhat bizarre situation made Kenjaku feel a bit puzzled, but before he could figure out Chinatsu's intention, Gojo Satoru rapidly charged towards him. Curse technique reversal red. A crimson projectile almost without any charge up, shot from Gojo Satoru's fingertip. This strike did not target Kenjaku's body, but instead hit one of the blues next to Kenjaku. A low-power purple exploded beside Kenjaku with a bang, inflicting relatively low damage while stirring up thick smoke in the air. Kenjaku waved his arm to disperse the smoke, and Gojo Satoru wiggled his fingers, once again causing an explosion and stirring up smoke. Not very damaging. Extremely insulting. Kenjaku's face twitched as he raised an open palm towards the front and moved his lips. Come here. Immediately, Gojo Satoru briefly felt he had lost control of his body. His original trajectory instantly changed, and his destination became the center of Kenjaku's massive palm. Just as Kenjaku thought he was about to grasp Gojo Satoru in his palm, Gojo Satoru's trajectory changed again. However, this was not the result of Gojo Satoru controlling his own body, but rather a third party applying a new force to Gojo Satoru. Indeed, it was Chinatsu. These floating blues in the air were not merely tools to assist Gojo Satoru in releasing red to form low-power purples. Rather, this apparent effect was actually a trap. After all, Kenjaku had an ability similar to cursed speech. If Kenjaku thought these blues were dangerous and could clear them all at once, it would be disastrous. With Gojo Satoru unable to move freely, Chinatsu forcibly altered Gojo Satoru's flight path using those blues that could emit strong suction. In an instant, Gojo Satoru was sent by Chinatsu to Kenjaku's massive Buddha-like face. Gojo Satoru then swung his fist, which had accumulated a considerable amount of cursed energy. Bang! The lucky black flash once again favored Gojo Satoru. Last time, his black flash had shocked the palm of Kenjaku's divine Buddha-like body, and this time, the black lightning bloomed on his cheek. Kenjaku stumbled backward as if about to fall, kicking up clouds of dust. The sound he made was not so much the thud of his steps, but rather his powerful wails. And when Kenjaku regained his balance, cracks like those of shattering glass art spread across the area on his cheek where Gojo Satoru's black flash had struck. However, this time these marks did not heal. Instead, like a broken artifact, golden Buddha face fragments peeled off and fell downwards, one after another. From within the golden Buddha body, a hideous devil's face was completely exposed, and people across the nation connected by black lines all let out cries of agony. One thought become Buddha. One thought become devil. Buddha and devil are but a thin line apart. But perhaps Kenjaku never became a Buddha from the very beginning. Chapter 135, Black Flash. As Kenjaku let out distorted wails, the 100 million people connected by the black lines above her head were also affected, each one struggling in pain and screaming, a scene resembling a living hell. What is going on? The Jujutsu sorcerers who didn't understand the situation looked at the scene and felt like they should start screaming too. Their work suppressing curse spirits and curse users was finally nearing its end, so why had a new problem suddenly appeared? A certain gang leader, who was both one of the hardest workers and one of the biggest slackers in the suppression effort, couldn't help but stop, raising a hand and waving gently, signaling his subordinate cursed spirits to halt as well. It seems it wasn't just my imagination. It looks like faint, barely perceptible lines are connected to the heads of these people, and the direction these black lines are stretching toward is. Geto Suguru looked up at the sky. Although he did not possess the Rikugan, he was still a special-grade sorcerer, and coupled with his long years spent dealing with cursed spirits, he possessed a subtle sharpness toward many nuances. Jogo! Geto Suguru raised a hand, aiming at one of the black lines stretching upward from the people's heads. Jogo, the disaster-cursed spirit under his control standing beside him, also raised its hand. Scorching magma violently erupted from its palm. Although the thread was subtle and delicate, Jogo's magma attack directly covered the entire area where the black line was located. The magma, powerful enough to melt a castle tower, swept past, yet the thin thread remained completely unharmed and continued to stretch vertically upward. Hanami. Geto Suguru spoke again, frowning slightly. Hanami, the disaster-cursed spirit standing opposite Jogo, stepped forward and raised its arm. The arm it extended immediately transformed into a thick branch that stretched upward, but the idea that the branch could touch the thread was shattered the next second, as the branch extended by Hanami passed directly through the thread. Watching this scene, Geto Suguru's pupils trembled violently, and he realized just how serious the current situation was. He quickly pulled out his phone, entered the group chat constructed by their circle of people, and began sending messages. Geto Suguru, Gojo. Gojo. And Sister Chinatsu, are you there? These lines are problematic. Yeri Shoko, lines? What lines? Geto, what exactly happened? All the patients on my side suddenly went crazy. Yuta Okatsu, I have the same situation here, but it doesn't seem to be caused by a curse. I can't sense any abnormal cursed energy inside these people. Yeri Shoko and Yuta Okatsu were both troubled while handling their respective situations, and it was precisely because of this sudden, baffling occurrence that they were, in a sense, freed up enough to immediately reply to Geto Suguru's message. Upon learning about the surrounding circumstances, Geto Suguru's frown deepened. However, more than the news from other regions, he was concerned that Gojo Satoru and Chinatsu had not replied to him. Could it be? Geto Suguru raised his head and looked toward the direction the threads were stretching from. His heart sank, and he immediately realized that the two might be deeply involved in a battle, and the situation was extremely critical. He then used the most concise language possible to inform everyone about the threads. Now was no longer the time to divide their forces to suppress cursed spirits and curse users. Those among them who could be considered combatants needed to go help. They couldn't put all the pressure on Gojo Satoru and Chinatsu alone. I don't know the exact location, but I can confirm it's in the south. I'm heading over now. I will confirm the location and send you the coordinates as I travel. After Geto Suguru finished speaking, he waved his arm, summoning a gigantic dragon cursed spirit. He jumped off the ground and instantly leaped onto the dragon's back, rapidly flying toward the south. At the same time, Kenjaku, who had fallen from a Buddha into a demon, was wildly causing destruction everywhere. There was no longer any goal in her eyes, and her layer of human consciousness was gradually dissipating. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru launched an ultra-high-frequency assault around the demonized Kenjaku. In terms of difficulty, Kenjaku's strength didn't put much pressure on the two of them, and Kenjaku's body was quickly riddled with holes. But the problem was that even though her body was riddled with holes, the demonized Kenjaku was still nowhere near death. Even if her head was blown up, the lines connecting the 100 million people were not affected in the slightest. Older sister. I know. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru temporarily stopped their attack and hovered in midair. Although their attacks didn't cause them much depletion, they truly needed to halt their actions and let their minds cool down. Kenjaku used the cursed energy of 100 million people to achieve a quantitative change. The energy structure building her body was no longer cursed energy, but an energy structure from outside this world, reducing the degree to which cursed energy could affect her to the absolute minimum. What should they do? Did they also have to change the fundamental nature of their cursed energy like Kenjaku? Leaving aside whether they could even achieve it, even if they did, would they still have time to launch an attack? Chinatsu's mind raced, but eventually she chose to abandon thinking and clenched her fist, which was the size of a sandbag. Clear blue cursed energy coiled around it like flames. Jujutsu Kaisen, officially delisted. Beat Jutsu Kaisen, proudly serialized. With determined eyes, Chinatsu quickly teleported in front of Kenjaku and struck Kenjaku's body with a focused punch. Bang! Black lightning instantly erupted. The section of Kenjaku's flesh struck by Chinatsu's fist immediately exploded, and the threads connecting the 100 million people in the sky trembled slightly. It works after all. Gojo, use Black Flash. Chinatsu took a deep breath and shouted. Seeing this, Gojo Satoru immediately understood what his older sister meant. He also quickly teleported around Kenjaku and began punching with fervor. Black Flash, the most unique technique of jujutsu sorcerers. A special spatial distortion occurs when the difference between a physical strike and cursed energy output is less than 0.000001 seconds, multiplying the original power by 2.5. Physical damage? Magical damage? True damage? All three. Although it was an unknown energy structure, as long as it was a physically existing entity, there was no need for melancholy or deep thought. They already had a ready-made means of attack. In the hands of Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru, this special technique, which no one could intentionally trigger, momentarily erupted continuously from their fists. Black Flash. Black Flash. Black Flash. Under the onslaught of one black lightning strike after another, although she tried to counterattack, she couldn't find an opportunity at all. The lightning of fortune favored them. At this very moment, only 1 minute remained until her mental and physical information fully synchronized with the 100 million people. Chapter 136. Kenjaku's body was almost swallowed by the black lightning. A black flash barrage of such high frequency had never been seen in the history of the entire jujutsu world. Although black flash is theoretically impossible for anyone to release actively, continuous release is not impossible. After landing the first black flash, a jujutsu sorcerer's state is greatly improved, making the second and third black flash no longer a fantasy. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru were both immersed in a state of concentration that shocked even themselves. Everything besides triggering black flash was meaningless, only the black lightning blooming from their fists consumed their entire being. Black flash. The two attacked from the left and right simultaneously, delivering a black flash barrage. The threads connecting Kenjaku's head to the 100 million people visibly shook, appearing precarious. However, less than 60 seconds remained until Kenjaku's complete assimilation with the 100 million people was complete. Sensing this progress, she, whose consciousness was already hard to definitively identify as Kenjaku's, continued to laugh maniacally with her head raised, even while enduring the combined double attack from Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru. Time favored Kenjaku. As time passed second by second, the frequency of Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru's black flash strikes also decreased, but both could feel that they were truly just a little bit short. Damn it! Gojo Satoru landed a forceful punch on Kenjaku's body. His punch did not produce a black flash, and at this moment, the final 10-second countdown until Kenjaku's assimilation was complete had begun. 10 seconds. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. 7 seconds. 6 seconds. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. 1 second. Kenjaku's laughter grew increasingly shrill. Gojo Satoru successfully landed one more black flash in the last second, but it was still just that tiny bit short. Were they going to lose? No, they wouldn't. This situation absolutely would not happen. Gojo Satoru, sweat streaming down his cheeks, turned his head to look at his older sister beside him. He saw that Chinatsu had, at some unknown point, withdrawn her punching stance and instead raised her hand, forming a special hand sign. Domain expansion? It didn't look like it. But if domain expansion, the ultimate secret of jujutsu, couldn't save them, what else could she use at this moment? Wait, could it be? Before a second had passed, Gojo Satoru understood what move his older sister was preparing to use, and simultaneously, he sighed helplessly in his heart. As expected, I can't compare to older sister. Thinking this, the tightly strung nerves of Gojo Satoru immediately relaxed. Simultaneously, Chinatsu's words followed. Maximum technique, Negi. Instantly, the shrill laughter emanating from Kenjaku's mouth abruptly ceased. The sound of explosions caused by cursed energy clashes vanished. The entire world fell silent, quiet as a colorless black and white picture. What is Limitless? The essence of Limitless is the ability to manipulate surrounding space-time through the atomic-level cursed energy manipulation precision granted by the Rikugan. What is maximum technique? If domain expansion is the ultimate secret of cursed techniques, then maximum technique is the extreme limit that a single cursed technique can achieve. For example, the cursed spirit Jogo's maximum technique is called Meteor, which can summon a giant molten meteorite. Geto Sugiru's Uzumaki allows him to sacrifice the cursed spirits he holds as fuel to unleash a world-shattering blast. Ever since Chinatsu mastered domain expansion, she had been continuously researching this extreme limit within the Limitless curse technique, which was inherited from Sugawara no Michizane in ancient times. However, trying to find their extreme limit within Limitless was truly too complex. For a time, it made Chinatsu feel as if she were trying to prove that 1 + 1 could equal 3, utterly absurd. Nevertheless, Chinatsu did not give up. Relying only on Mirror Flower Watermoon as a trump card was not enough. Unforeseen situations were bound to occur in the future, and attempting an on-the-spot breakthrough then would be too reckless. Preparing in advance suited Chinatsu's personality. Of course, there was a significant element of risk involved. Over the years, Chinatsu had only managed to grasp the general concept. Although she had succeeded before, the result was almost the same as failure. Otherwise, she would have used it when fighting Sukuna, instead of hiding it until now. Limitless, the power of stillness. Lapse Blue, the power of attraction. Reversal red, the power of repulsion. When the powers of attraction and repulsion combine and clash, the power known as hollow purple is generated. This is a fictitious mass that should not exist, capable of annihilating other matter. And when the basic limitless defense is isolated, expanded, and specialized, the power of stillness completely covers the surrounding spacetime. This was Chinatsu's maximum technique. At this moment, Chinatsu was situated in a spacetime where only she could move. She herself was unsure how long this could be maintained. In her attempts, the worst record only lasted 0.1 seconds. Chinatsu took a deep breath and clenched her fist. The brief moment she had managed to seize was her last chance. She absolutely could not fail. Clear, bright blue cursed energy gathered on her fist. In the instant, Chinatsu abandoned everything and concentrated on this single punch. Although she hadn't struck yet, Chinatsu seemed to see the future where she landed a black flash. Black flash. Chinatsu landed a solid punch squarely on Kenjaku's surface, and brilliant black lightning fiercely bloomed. In terms of raw power, this strike absolutely couldn't compare to the black flash she delivered at her peak, but this final black flash was like the last straw that broke the camel's back. Time began to flow again. Chinatsu, feeling somewhat exhausted, descended from mid-air onto the ground. As the extreme limit of a cursed technique and one with such an abnormal effect, the maximum technique's consumption, both mental and physical, was enormous. However, it was worth it. Gojo Satoru quickly rushed to Chinatsu's side and asked about her physical condition. Chinatsu simply waved her hand quietly, indicating that she was fine. She raised her head and looked at Kenjaku floating in midair. Starting from a body like a god or Buddha, then transitioning to the grotesque silhouette of a demon, she now struggled to maintain even a human form, floating in the air as an ugly, unidentifiable mass. Most importantly, the black threads connecting her head to the 100 million people were already broken. Even if the data transmission progress reached 99.9%, as long as it didn't reach 100%, it was unequivocally a transmission failure. Kenjaku, we won. Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru stood on the ground, looking at Kenjaku, who was about to completely collapse from existence, declaring their final victory. Unexpectedly, facing the collapse of her existence, Kenjaku merely transitioned from one type of madness to a new one. While continuously collapsing, she stretched out one of her fingers toward Chinatsu, opening her lips with a ferocious expression. Chinatsu, I curse you. Chapter 137, The Strongest Curse. In the world of Jujutsu, the self-imposed rule known as a binding vow holds absolute priority. Jujutsu sorcerers can exchange something they value for something they desire. Within this large framework of binding vow, there exists an unusual entity known as a curse. A Jujutsu sorcerer's curse is not as trivial as an ordinary person's verbal curse. Especially when a Jujutsu sorcerer is on the verge of death, the overflowing cursed energy symbolizing negative emotions pours out, and the words they utter can have an effect similar to cursed speech, influencing others' destinies. And at this moment, Kenjaku cursed Chinatsu. Man cannot triumph over heaven. The will of heaven cannot be defied. Chinatsu, I curse you to be unable to continue enjoying the pleasures you anticipate as an ordinary person. You have defeated the Buddha, you are the new Buddha. Unlock the shackles in your heart and release your true self, suppressed for many years. Under Kenjaku's distorted face, his fingers pointed directly at Chinatsu on the ground. The unknown energy, which had mutated from cursed energy, suddenly regressed back to cursed energy, symbolizing negative energy, and rushed towards Chinatsu like a flood. Before Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru could react, the overwhelming flood engulfed Chinatsu. This scene, witnessed by Gojo Satoru, made his eyes tremble as if an earthquake had struck. Older sister? Gojo Satoru quickly reached out his palm to touch the flood of cursed energy, wanting to pull his older sister out. Kenjaku, on the verge of collapse, lifted his head and continued to let out an ear-piercing laugh. Although she believed her 1,000-year plan had failed, this final move was absolutely a divine stroke, enough to completely cover up her previous ugly defeat. Chinatsu, I win. So noisy. Before Kenjaku's voice completely fell, a crimson bullet suddenly shot out from the flood of cursed energy, completely blasting the collapsing Kenjaku into tiny fragments. And amidst the fragments of her eyeball, she saw Chinatsu slowly emerging from the cleansing of the cursed energy flood. She had her head bowed, her body filled with astonishingly evil cursed energy. Chinatsu, I won. Kenjaku completely turned into dust with a sense of relief, using her final divine stroke to mark what she considered a perfect final curtain call. Older sister? Older sister? Gojo Satoru looked at Chinatsu beside him with complicated feelings. In his gaze, Chinatsu slightly lowered her head, one hand raised to cover half of her face, gasping for breath. All sorts of negative emotions filled her mind. Chinatsu's mental state was already fatigued, so how could she endure such torment? I worked so hard for this exam, truly, truly hard. Don't hit me anymore, don't scold me anymore. I really tried my best. Next time I will definitely do well. Work is so tiring. Why do I have to suffer like this? The department head at work keeps making things difficult for me. What did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? I really feel like living is so hard. Every month I have to pay $6,000 for my mortgage and nearly $3,000 for my car loan. Even if I work myself to death every month, I only earn a little over $10,000. I eat at the company to save money. I don't dare to have any other expenses. These clothes I'm wearing have been worn for a very long time. Happy birthday to me. Happy birthday to me. The scene in Chinatsu's vision seemed to distort. The negative emotions of 100 million people converged within her mental state. The degree of pain was indescribable. Kenjaku, who should have collapsed, appeared as if behind her. She approached Chinatsu's body with a wicked smile, her palm gently caressing half of Chinatsu's face. Stop struggling. You deserve to enjoy a better life. A phoenix doesn't need to be stuck in a chicken coop. You are nobler than everyone else. Those wild chickens are merely tools to highlight you. Stop self-restricting and release your true nature. Get lost. Chinatsu forcefully swung her arm backward, but Kenjaku's figure only twisted slightly and did not disappear. Instead, the wicked smile on her face became even more deeply etched into Chinatsu's eyes. Look at you. TSK. I told you you're too greedy. Even though your strength is enough to surpass all of history, you lack the heart of a strong individual. And this heart of a strong individual is the biggest difference between you and me. Sukuna's figure appeared before Chinatsu. He watched Chinatsu with his head held high and eyebrows furrowed, letting out a heavy sigh with an expression of boredom. Chinatsu knew these were all illusions, just hallucinations caused by the influence of negative emotions. Other voices were the same, auditory hallucinations, all auditory hallucinations. Chinatsu in the mental world raised her hands to cover her ears, but it was useless. Those negative emotions continued to erode the pure land of her mental world like a rampant flood. In the real world, Gojo Satoru swallowed a mouthful of saliva with a gulp. He took a step towards his older sister with an uneasy feeling and raised an arm. Older sister. Whoosh! The moment Gojo Satoru's voice sounded, Chinatsu suddenly turned to face him. Her clear azure eyes were gradually being invaded by dark red, and she sharply threw a punch at Gojo Satoru. Gojo Satoru quickly crossed his arms to defend. When limitless power collides with limitless power, the stronger one can undoubtedly crush the other. Bang! A deafening impact sounded, and Gojo Satoru was sent flying straight backward. Although being sent flying by his older sister was not a first, this time clearly surpassed all previous instances. The precise manipulation of cursed energy seemed to have decreased, but the corresponding pure cursed energy output had increased by several levels. Gojo Satoru, who had been sent flying into the air, was about to adjust his posture to descend and land, but a black figure flashed in the distance in the direction he was sent flying. Satoru! Geto Suguru, standing on the rainbow dragon, saw Gojo Satoru being sent flying. He didn't have time to be surprised by what was happening. He quickly had the rainbow dragon adjust its flight path and caught Gojo Satoru in midair. Thanks, Suguru. Let's not talk about that for now. What exactly happened here? Besides Sister Chinatsu, I really find it hard to imagine anyone else who could send you flying. Drops of cold sweat ran down Geto Suguru's cheeks. From his position, he couldn't see the enemy's appearance, but he could clearly sense that astonishing cursed energy. Wait, where's Sister Chinatsu? Geto Suguru froze slightly, turning his head with confusion to ask Gojo Satoru and resolve the questions in his mind. But when he turned, he saw an anxious expression on Gojo Satoru's face that he had never shown before. An ominous premonition surged in Geto Suguru's heart. Suguru, there's a big problem. Chapter 138, One-Sided Crushing. What? Sister Chinatsu is rampaging. After receiving the intelligence from Gojo Satoru, Geto Suguru felt completely unwell. Although she had rarely been beaten up by Chinatsu, he had witnessed almost every time Gojo Satoru got thrashed. For a moment, both of their minds began simulating whether they could defeat Chinatsu if they teamed up. Although both usually claimed to be the strongest, when they actually faced Chinatsu, it was hard for them to muster that much confidence. However, there was no time for hesitation. In less than a minute, the Rainbow Dragon, the most durable cursed spirit under Geto Suguru's control, charged as the vanguard straight into the rampaging Chinatsu's line of sight. Chinatsu did not choose to raise her hand to crush the Rainbow Dragon midair. She simply looked up at the direction the Rainbow Dragon was flying toward her and slowly clenched her fist. The Rainbow Dragon opened its massive, fanged mouth. Chinatsu unleashed a swift punch. Bang! Massive, solidified black cursed energy poured out with Chinatsu's punch. Although what she struck with was not a black flash, it possessed a similar overwhelming momentum. The Rainbow Dragon's face was instantly contorted by the blow, and its massive body crumpled and bounced repeatedly, both soft and hard, across the ground in the direction it was sent flying, finally plunging headfirst into the ruins of a collapsed building in the distance. The azure-blue eyes were gone. Scarlet-red eyes flickered. Chinatsu grinned excitedly, staring intently in the direction the Rainbow Dragon had been blasted, unaware that Gojo Satoru and Geto Suguru had successfully landed under the cover provided by the Rainbow Dragon moments earlier. Jogo? Hanami. Geto Suguru waved both hands and the figures of the two great disaster-cursed spirits rushed out of the black mist, launching an attack on Chinatsu. Blissful Garden. Hanami quickly squatted down, placing one hand on the ground. The area centered around her immediately burst into bloom with colorful, vibrant flowers, transforming into a beautiful flower field. The fragrance of these flowers could cause anyone who inhaled them to relax their minds and drop their guard. Building on this, Hanami also controlled branches that spread out from underground, turning them into vines attempting to bind Chinatsu. In response, Chinatsu merely glanced down at the restless branches beneath her, completely unconcerned by them. Jogo seized the opportunity, stomped his feet, and leaped into the air. After accumulating sufficient power, he swung his arm. Maximum technique, meteorite. A horrifying, massive meteorite descended from the sky, hurtling toward Chinatsu with the momentum of turning the ground into a new volcanic landscape. Chinatsu quietly lifted her head, watching the meteorite draw closer and closer until it struck her directly, resulting in a violent explosion. Jogo nervously watched the location of the explosion caused by his maximum technique. Although he was very confident in the power of his maximum technique, its effectiveness depended on the opponent. This opponent was that monster. Before Jogo could finish his internal monologue, Chinatsu suddenly appeared right in front of him, like a ghost popping up in a horror film. She delivered a kick. The raised leg of Chinatsu made intimate contact with Jogo's face. Amidst his mournful screams, he was blasted away like a cannonball. Hanami's eyes widened. Before she even had time to process the shock before being hit by another shock, Jogo's experience was visited upon her. One to the left, one to the right. Two explosions echoed in different directions. As the controller, Geto Suguru could feel that while the two cursed spirits were not instantly annihilated, they had lost their ability to fight. Even Geto Suguru, who had mentally prepared himself, couldn't help but shudder at this sight. Unlike the pressure he had felt while repeatedly observing Chinatsu and Gojo Satoru fight, the sense of danger was inhaled into his mind like poisonous smoke through his mouth and nose. Geto! Suddenly, a loud shout from Gojo Satoru pulled him back from his daze to reality. Unbeknownst to him, Chinatsu had already arrived in front of him, and a fist the size of a sandbag was hurtling toward him. Geto Suguru immediately raised the cloud of wandering triple section staff in his hand and assumed a defensive stance. However, the impact generated by Chinatsu's punch, which was filled with numerical beauty, still sent him flying. At the same time, Gojo Satoru, using teleportation, appeared behind Chinatsu. He attempted a hook punch aimed at the back of her head, but unfortunately it was caught by Chinatsu's outstretched hand at the very last moment. Without any verbal exchange, Chinatsu swung Gojo Satoru like a chain ball. With a rushing sound of air being torn, Gojo Satoru spun freely in the air like a cat, landing safely beside Geto Suguru, who was barely picking himself up off the ground. Despite it being 2 against 1, they gained no advantage whatsoever. Beads of sweat involuntarily rolled down their faces as they felt unprecedented pressure. This isn't as simple as Greymon mistakenly evolving into the perfect level Metal Greymon. Even the ultimate level Machinedramon isn't this absurd, right? Gojo Satoru breathed rhythmically with his mouth open. Although Geto Suguru didn't quite understand the Digimon analogy he used, he was certainly aware of the severity of the current situation. Her precise manipulation of cursed energy had slightly decreased, but this was replaced by a massive increase in cursed energy, enough to compensate for the drop in precision. A Rikugan Limitless Jujutsu sorcerer is inherently a mechanism anomaly, and now this anomaly has been combined with raw power. Even if they were given ample time to devise a strategy, they might not come up with a perfect way to defeat her, but the rampaging Chinatsu clearly had no intention of giving them time to think. Chinatsu raised one hand and pointed her fingers like a gun. As cursed energy was visibly drawn out and condensed, a scarlet projectile filled with fury and destructive power hovered at her fingertip. A roar exploded and the scarlet projectile shot straight toward Gojo Satoru and Geto Suguru. The two watched the attack with grave expressions, already preparing their defenses. Just then, a concentrated blast of massive cursed energy shot out from the distance, colliding with the scarlet projectile while it was still mid-flight. Bang! The powerful aftermath seemed capable of tearing up the ground. A young man descended from the sky, landing in the swirling dust and blowing the debris away. I can sense that Sister Chinatsu's attack just now was filled with killing intent. What exactly happened? The current Sister Chinatsu feels incredibly unfamiliar to me. Yuta Okatsu held his katana with a solemn expression, adopting a defensive stance. Yeri Shoko, who had also arrived, quickly went to Gojo Satoru and Geto Suguru's side to inquire about their injuries. As reinforcements, the special-grade combatant Yuta Okatsu and Yeri Shoko, who had grown up treating others using the reverse curse technique, were naturally reliable assets. However, they were not the only two who had arrived. A silver-haired woman appeared beside them. This person was the Jujutsu sorcerer Tengen, who had previously been locked in the clan's secret chamber by Chinatsu and had only just managed to escape. Chapter 139, Four-Dimensional Domain. How did you get here? Gojo Satoru looked at the suddenly appearing Tengen and asked a very innocent question, but it was precisely this innocent question that made Tengen's mouth twitch uncontrollably. Originally, she was living peacefully in her tomb chamber when this guy's older sister suddenly appeared before her. Without even exchanging many words, Sister Chinatsu struck her unconscious with a hand chop and stuffed her into a sack. When she woke up, she was tied up in a secret room of the Gojo family, filled with various barriers and seals. The dim secret room, the confinement of the barriers. Even if Tengen tried her best to break through the barriers and seals in the secret room, she barely managed to escape and saw a glimmer of light, like an illusion, only to find several Gojo family guards appearing in her line of sight. If she hadn't coincidentally met Yuta Okatsu and Shoko Yeri, who were on their way and used her utmost persuasive power, she would still be lying in the Gojo family's secret room. Of course, Tengen understood that Chinatsu was detaining her for her protection. At first, Tengen also thought of just staying in the secret room until Chinatsu came to pick her up. However, as time passed minute by minute, under Tengen's keen perception of cursed energy, the dangerous situation across the country, which seemed to have slightly decreased, was actually becoming more perilous. Tengen could not remain calm and composed in the rear no matter what. It's just that the scene before her made her, who had intended to come and help, seem so small and powerless, even trembling just standing in a corner of this battlefield. Unlike my own forced evolution due to my immortal curse technique, Chinatsu's current state is less about self-evolution and more about self-alteration. Her will is being twisted. If this continues... Drops of cold sweat involuntarily trickled down Tengen's cheeks, and the words she spoke cast another heavy, dark shroud over the already oppressive atmosphere. At the same time, Yuta Okatsu, who had landed in front, was contending with the berserk Chinatsu. However, it was less a contention and more a desperate struggle. Even with a hit-and-run tactic, he found it difficult to last long. Sister Chinatsu? Sister Chinatsu? It's Yuta. Wake up, wake. Before Yuta Okatsu's persuasion could last much longer, Chinatsu's storm-like assault sent Yuta Okatsu flying. If not for the flying cursed spirit prepared by Geto Suguru intercepting her in midair, it was unclear how far she would have flown. Yuta Okatsu, sent to the rear of the battle line by the cursed spirit, immediately received treatment from Shoko Yeri. As someone who had specialized in reverse curse techniques since childhood, although she couldn't compare to the Gojo siblings, she was still more efficient than Okatsu. Yuta Okatsu endured the burning pain on his body and spoke. Everyone around him initially thought Okatsu's words would lower the atmosphere like Tingen's, but to their surprise they offered a glimmer of hope instead. It shouldn't be my imagination. When Sister Chinatsu fought me, she intentionally or unintentionally reduced her cursed energy output. There was even one strike that I personally felt was dangerous, but in the end it was far less impactful than I expected. As Yuta Okatsu's words fell, Shoko Yeri, who was treating him, also nodded in agreement. Indeed, when I examined and treated the injuries, I found that many of Okatsu's wounds were in critical areas, but the blunt force trauma was comparatively less severe than in other places. Listening to their words, everyone's spirits lifted as they looked towards Chinatsu in front. They saw that Chinatsu, who had sent Yuta Okatsu flying, did not continue to charge at them. Instead, she stopped in place, seemingly struggling. Chinatsu's will was resisting. Seeing this, Gojo Satoru and Geto Suguru instantly clenched their fists, and a glimmer of hope ignited in their hearts. Tengen, nearby, was also the same and even proposed a plan, but this plan poured a bucket of cold water on their newly kindled hope. Perhaps we can consider a sealing tactic. The Jujutsu world has a supreme treasure called the Prison Realm. As long as the conditions are met, it can seal any target. Although I don't know where this treasure is, if given time, I am confident I can find it. Before that, let's retreat, and once it's found then. No. Tingen's words were ruthlessly interrupted, and not just by one person. Everyone present besides her unanimously chose to object. Although the sealing Tengen spoke of was the most optimistic decision at the moment, even if other methods only had a 1% chance of saving Chinatsu, no one present wanted to choose sealing. Moreover, putting aside personal feelings for the public good, if they were to retreat from here now, the berserk Chinatsu might completely lose control. A hero who saved the nation from chaos would instead incite a new era of chaos, potentially leading to countless lives being lost. Such an outcome would be too cruel for them, the populace, and even Chinatsu herself. This must never happen. Just as everyone was making the resolute decision in their hearts that they must stop Chinatsu here no matter what, Chinatsu, as if freed from her struggle, revealed a crazed expression and raised her hands. Damn it, it's a domain. Everyone instantly understood what Chinatsu in front of them intended to do. Normal combat was already very disadvantageous. If they were dragged into Chinatsu's abnormal domain, their hope would approach zero. At this moment, everyone's brains were working frantically, and their hands were decisively raised, beginning their own domain expansion hand seals. Gojo Satoru's pinky fingers and ring fingers interlaced inwards, his index fingers and thumbs stood upright, their tips touching, his middle fingers wrapped around his index fingers, and he pressed them into 5 points on his body. This was the 8-bat wheel, the Marisai Heavenly Fundamental Seal. Domain Expansion, Unlimited Void. Yuta Okatsu clenched his left hand into a fist, while his other palm was joined and extended straight, palm inward, back of the hand outward, forming the Dakini 10 seal. Domain Expansion, Dark Mind Mirror. Geto Suguru spread his hands, separating and interlacing his left and right thumbs and index fingers, while the rest of his fingers clenched downwards into fists. Then his 2 middle fingers stood upright, certifying the Jizo Fundamental Seal. Domain Expansion, Jambudvipa Sentient Beings. The 3 great domains instantly expanded, and their domain energy was concentrated as much as possible to the front, focusing precision to collide with Chinatsu's domain. Both hands spread outwards, both thumbs stood upright, and both index fingers stood up slightly curved like lotus leaves, forming the Samayar-in of Vajrajul Bodhisattva. Domain Expansion, Mirror Flower, Water Moon. Chapter 140, Consciousness Has Not Yet Died. Domain Expansion, Mirror Flower, Water Moon. Domain Expansion, Unlimited Void. Domain Expansion, Yenfu Sentient Beings. Domain Expansion, Mixed Dark Consciousness Mindscape. The 4 domain expansions were deployed almost simultaneously, 2 of which had reached the highest level of domain expansion, the Open Barrier Domain. The intense pressure generated by the collision of these domains permeated the world, seemingly intent on crushing it. Cracking sounds continuously echoed, signs that the outer barriers of Geto Sugiru's and Yuta Okatsu's domains were about to give way and shatter. After all, their domains were still just standard closed barrier domains. Furthermore, Gojo Satoru's unlimited void beside them was the type that indiscriminately affected everything around him except himself, meaning they were being affected by their own ally. But without the domains of those two, even if Gojo Satoru's unlimited void and Chinatsu's mirror flower watermoon were both open barrier domains, they would not be able to establish a position of equality. Of course, they weren't equal now either. Under Chinatsu's slightly raised maniacal expression, her mirror flower watermoon domain was continuously expanding. The cursed energy of 100 million people had transformed it into a quantitative change, and the fact that a mere 3 people could barely contend with it already demonstrated their extraordinary abilities. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3 seconds. Geto Sugiru's and Yuta Okatsu's domains shattered into fragments under the immense pressure, and rolling waves of air swept them backward. Although Gojo Satoru was concerned about the two, he had to concentrate on maintaining his unlimited void. If his domain was also breached, then they would truly be finished. Unlimited void could cause others' brains to crash. It was a sure-kill domain expansion. But wasn't her older sister's mirror flower watermoon also a sure-kill domain expansion? The rolling air current surged directly into Gojo Satoru's face, making his pale blue eyes appear somewhat dim amidst the turbulent air. His hands, clasped in the madra, were trembling slightly. Unlimited void was on the verge of collapsing. Suddenly, Geto Sugiru reappeared beside him. He merely raised his hand to wipe away the drops of blood flowing from his nose before once again forming the Buddha's madra and deploying his domain expansion. Domain expansion, Yenfu sentient beings. With the power of Geto Sugiru's domain, the pressure on Gojo Satoru instantly decreased. A few seconds later, Yuta Okatsu also climbed up from the ground and returned to Gojo Satoru's side. So reverse cursed technique can be used to repair cursed technique reversal like this? I learned another lesson. After Yuta Okatsu finished speaking, a faint look of pain crossed his face, and like Geto Sugiru, he raised his hands once more to form his Buddha's madra. Domain expansion, mixed dark consciousness mindscape. The situation, which was about to be overwhelmed, returned to the state of initial confrontation. Tengen behind them was stunned by this sequence of actions. Reverse curse technique repairing. Curse technique reversal? Reverse curse technique converts inherently negative cursed energy into positive cursed energy beneficial to the human body, thereby healing the physical form. Curse technique reversal is when the body automatically enters a self-protective state after a deployed domain expansion shatters. Like a hot engine that needs cooling before it can safely start, deploying a domain expansion again requires waiting for the reversal period to end. Was there a connection between these 2 points? Tengen's brain was working rapidly at this moment. Ordinary jujutsu sorcerers certainly couldn't figure out the connection, but she was, after all, a 1,000-year-old jujutsu sorcerer and the strongest barrier user in the jujutsu world. Destroying the brain with cursed energy and then treating it with reverse cursed technique? Tengen muttered a thought that she herself found terrifying. The innate technique is imprinted in a part of the brain. If they use cursed energy to destroy that part of the brain and then use reverse curse technique to completely repair the damage, they might be able to bypass the time needed for curse technique reversal, essentially exploiting a glitch. Risky, too risky. The brain is the most fragile part of the human body. Destroying and restoring it so casually, no matter how precisely controlled, would still cause damage to the brain. Beads of sweat ran down Tengen's cheeks, but she felt a heartfelt sense of the trio's determination to save Chinatsu. However, she was fundamentally a rational person. While the 3 individuals confronted Chinatsu, she began working on constructing a high-strength barrier capable of trapping Chinatsu, who possessed such immense power. She was the strongest barrier user. Through her mastery of barrier techniques and the enhancement of binding vows, restraining Chinatsu for a short period might not be a pipe dream. As long as she could restrain Chinatsu for a little while, and use that time to find the prison realm and completely seal Chinatsu, then this world could still be saved. That was what Tengen was thinking. As the emotional Gojo Satoru and the others and the rational Tengen all began to act, time once again became the element they needed to fight for. Deploy, shatter, repair, deploy. Repeating this cycle, the trio suppressed their physical discomfort and continued to resist Chinatsu's Mirror Flower Water Moon. Yuta Okatsu and Geto Suguru were actively trying to relieve pressure on Gojo Satoru, hoping to give him a chance for Unlimited Void to take effect on Chinatsu, even if only for 0.1 seconds. Behind them, Tengen continuously constructed a sealing barrier capable of trapping Chinatsu temporarily, beads of sweat running down her cheeks. At one point, her cursed energy was nearly depleted, but thankfully Yeri Shoko was there to channel cursed energy into her. Although Yeri Shoko did not want Chinatsu to be sealed, if they couldn't stop Chinatsu here, historical records would turn Chinatsu from a hero into a universally despised demon. Yeri Shoko could not accept such a cruel outcome. Time passed minute by minute. Although the trio were unwilling to admit their physical condition was deteriorating, the cold sweat streaming down their faces and the nosebleeds betrayed their true state. In contrast, Chinatsu showed no signs of decline. The corners of her mouth were slightly raised, as if she were still just playing and hadn't used her full power. Of course, this was only a hypothetical assumption, as the curse technique talent of the three individuals before her was undeniably strong. However, Chinatsu possessed the cursed energy equivalent of 100 million people. Even if they could barely contend for a short time, prolonged engagement was a different matter entirely. It was about time. Chinatsu grinned, tilting her head slightly. She planned to now boost the concentration of her domain expansion in one go, overthrowing the three individuals who were clearly sinking into exhaustion. But just as she mentally sentenced the three before her to death and began to increase the domain expansion's concentration, she suddenly widened her eyes, realizing the domain concentration wouldn't increase. No, rather than saying it wouldn't increase, it felt as though she had already done so, but the domain's concentration hadn't actually risen, as if she herself had been caught in Mirror Flower Water Moon. Wait! Mirror Flower Water Moon? Chinatsu froze suddenly. Her consciousness briefly entered the depths of her own mental world, as if she had realized something, and she frantically searched for the answer. Chapter 141, The Depths of the Spiritual World. Let us temporarily rewind time to about 10 minutes ago, when Kenjaku was still clinging to life and unleashing a curse upon Chinatsu. Chinatsu, I curse you to be unable to continue enjoying the joy you anticipated as an ordinary person. You defeated me, so become the new Buddha of this world. Break free from the shackles in your heart and release the true self you have suppressed for years. With a ferocious expression, Kenjaku pointed a finger at Chinatsu. Overwhelming cursed energy and negative emotions suddenly surged toward Chinatsu like a vast ocean. Before Chinatsu could even react, she was swallowed by this deluge. All sorts of negative emotions appeared in Chinatsu's eyes like ferocious vengeful spirits. A suffocating feeling surged from the depths of her heart, as if she were sinking deeper into a treacherous mire. Chinatsu raised one of her arms, attempting to struggle out of the mire, but how easy was it for one person's spirit to contend against such a massive spiritual collective? After struggling for a moment, she retracted her raised arm. Just as her surface consciousness was about to be corrupted by the negative emotions, Chinatsu, as if holding her breath, used her last shred of consciousness to form the hand sign for domain expansion. Domain expansion, Mirror Flower Water Moon. This domain opened and dissolved instantly because the domain expansion only covered her. Mirror Flower Water Moon, which was meant to be used on others, was now directed at herself, successfully severing her original consciousness from the mutated consciousness at the critical juncture. This was the only method Chinatsu could think of in such a short time. It was both her ultimate reserve and her ace in the hole. In the depths of Chinatsu's mental world, two Chinatsus stood on opposite sides. One Chinatsu continuously radiated dense cursed energy. Her hair and clothes fluttered as if caught in a gale of surging cursed energy, and her expression was extremely gloomy. The other Chinatsu was faintly wrapped in chains, but the expression on her face was anything but gloomy. Instead, she slightly raised her head and looked at her counterpart across the way with a smile. Who do you think you are trying to corrupt? How could I possibly surrender so easily? Even if this is truly a desperate situation, I will drag someone down with me. Yes, I am talking about you. Although the situation was still overwhelmingly unfavorable, Chinatsu herself did not display the mental state of facing adversity and falling into despair, causing the altered Chinatsu standing opposite her to frown in confusion. Even if you used Mirror Flower Water Moon to separate yourself, this action is, at most, just clinging to life. Especially now that I have discovered your little trick, I am very confused about why you can still smile. Although altered Chinatsu was inwardly anxious, she feigned calmness, raising her arms and crossing them over her chest, acting as if victory was assured on her side. In fact, this was true. Even though Chinatsu herself used mirror flower, water moon to preserve the last shred of her self-consciousness, she had already lost control over her physical body. One side was filled with power and held dominance over the body, while the other was clinging to life, hidden in the depths of the mental world and now discovered. The superiority of one over the other was obvious. Of course, Chinatsu understood this point. After all, even though her body was currently occupied by the sudden new consciousness, she was, fundamentally, the original and true owner. Reclaiming the body, that was impossible. A direct clash of consciousness, difficult to execute. If this mutated consciousness had not voluntarily entered the depths of the mental world, actively appearing before her, Chinatsu would not have had the ability to initiate a meeting. However, the meeting of the two now gave Chinatsu this opportunity. It was also thanks to Gojo Satoru and the others not giving up the fight against the external Chinatsu, applying pressure to her. Otherwise, she would not have realized she was caught in mirror flower, water moon and come to the depths of the mental world seeking answers. Under Chinatsu's subtle smile, an ominous premonition gradually surfaced in the feigning calm altered Chinatsu. She was a nascent consciousness born from Chinatsu, and precisely because of this, she understood Chinatsu's personality even better. Having transmigrated to the world of Jujutsu Kaisen for unknown reasons, she had strived since infancy to change the tragedies of the Jujutsu world. Outwardly eccentric but privately taciturn, she constantly accumulated pressure upon herself for the sake of that perfect goal in her heart. And precisely because Chinatsu was a perfectionist, she would absolutely not allow the altered Chinatsu to occupy her body and commit evil deeds. She shouldn't just be putting on an act. But where did this confidence stem from? Could it be that besides Mirror Flower, Water Moon, her life-saving card, she had another trump card capable of defying fate and turning the tables? Altered Chinatsu watched her original self with a heavy gaze, her fists involuntarily clenching tightly. Driven by the ominous premonition in her heart, she opened her mouth. What is wrong with being unrestrained? We possess the strength to ignore any rule in this world. We can do what Sukuna did 1,000 years ago, and we can even do it better. This world has never been beautiful. The weak who exist in this world can never change their fate no matter how much they struggle. This is the truth that people tacitly accept, yet those weaklings strive to forget it, putting on a facade of acceptance. But we are different. We don't need to care about this. What does the world's perfection or imperfection have to do with us? We only need to care about ourselves. As altered Chinatsu spoke, the surrounding mental space became chaotic and volatile. A dark aura drifted from her location, and the ground gradually turned into a muddy swamp. Just as altered Chinatsu's demonic grasp was about to swallow Chinatsu, like a star twinkling in the dark night sky or a warm bonfire burning on the ground, the invading dark grasp suddenly halted its movement. You are correct, this world is cruel, but there are still various beautiful things worth protecting, and this is what I have been doing up until now. Geto Sugiru's mental breakdown. Hibara's tragic encounter. Kento Nanami's tragic death. Amini Riko's anticipated future. Yaga Mazumichi's political execution. Rika Orimoto's death by car accident. Yuta Okatsu's unfortunate childhood. Itadori Yuji's cursed destiny. And even the countless civilians annihilated by the slashes unleashed by Raiman Sukuna during the Shibuya incident and so on. Chinatsu stepped toward the darkness rushing forward, and a power like a star in the night sky and a fire in the darkness isolated that darkness from Chinatsu. Seeing the changes in Chinatsu, altered Chinatsu's figure suddenly distorted. She widened her eyes in confusion, momentarily unable to figure out the source of this unknown power. This power, could it be a binding vow? The Jujutsu world's highest spec bug rule, Jujutsu sorcerers can sacrifice certain cherished things in exchange for the abilities they desire, and the scale of the acquired ability is closely related to the value and degree of cherishment of the sacrificed item. Chinatsu calmly raised one arm toward her opponent. A faint smile still hung on her face, but the emotion carried by this smile was different from before. Precisely because this world is not beautiful, I strive to turn this imperfect story into the way I anticipate it to be. And it seems my efforts were not in vain. As Chinatsu's voice fell, countless chains named Binding Vow suddenly materialized and descended, binding both individuals within the mental space. Several minutes passed in the mental world. A mere instant passed in the real world. Chinatsu, who was currently clashing domains with Gojo Satoru and the others while using Mirror Flower, Water Moon, suddenly lost the light in her eyes, ceasing all movement like a wind-up doll that had run out of power. Chapter 142, My Ideal of Perfection. Altered Chinatsu lowered her head, gazing in shock at the shackles wrapped around her body. Though they didn't completely restrict her movement, they transformed her from a lofty strong individual into an utterly mediocre ordinary person. This was undoubtedly the effect of the binding vow. Altered Chinatsu raised her head, her red eyes, already distinct from the Rikugan's azure, now glowed even more crimson. She gritted her teeth, roaring like a furious beast at her other self, who was also bound by the same shackles. I am you. You are me. We are one. Why go to such lengths to deny yourself? Isn't it good to be unrestrained? Isn't it good to be free? Didn't we work so hard back then just to live a leisurely, untroubled life in the end? Look at what you're doing now. The emotions in her words were neither feigned nor false, for she was indeed as she said. Though the external conflict was the factor that gave birth to her, she undoubtedly originated from a dark corner of Chinatsu's own heart. Chinatsu had considered becoming an unrestrained Sukuna, devoid of moral constraints. If she could harden her heart and move in that direction, it would certainly be much easier. And this thought, amidst Kenjaku's deliberate creation of nationwide chaos and ever-increasing pressure, was constantly probing Chinatsu's deepest self like a devil's claw. In the depths of the spiritual world, the shackles of the binding vow now bound both of them. One gnashed her teeth, roaring in anger, while the other merely bowed her head in silence, as if accepting her fate. It was this scene that infuriated altered Chinatsu even more. She opened her mouth and continued to loudly rebuke. What are you doing? Accepting your fate to perish with me. Sacrificing yourself for the future of those people outside. What kind of spiritual victory is this? Do you really think this is good enough? Altered Chinatsu clenched her teeth. She originated from Chinatsu's spirit. In other words, apart from her extreme personality, she possessed the same memories, thought processes, and so on as the original host. Precisely because of this, no one understood Chinatsu better than she did, because she was also Chinatsu. Chinatsu had many labels, and people around her had many different evaluations of her. Some teased Chinatsu for her twisted personality, some envied Chinatsu's talent, and some admired Chinatsu. Chinatsu was perhaps, or rather was undoubtedly a perfectionist. Since transmigrating to this world, she had been preparing for and altering various future tragedies. Suguru Geto, Hibara, Kento Nanami, Riko Amanai, Mazumichi Yaga, Rika Orimoto, Yuta Okatsu, Yuji Itadori. She had done her utmost to help those around her avoid tragic endings, striving to reach the ultimate perfect ending. Although there would be some unavoidable self-sacrifice in the process of reaching the perfect ending, Chinatsu had actually never excluded herself from the grand list of those who would reach the perfect ending. I don't like tragic endings. But now I have given up? Although this might be the best method at the moment, this is completely unlike me and completely unlike Chinatsu. It's simply... Altered Chinatsu seemed to have thought of something. She suddenly lowered her head to look at the shackles of the binding vow on her own body, then raised her head to look at the shackles of the binding vow on her other self. At the same time, Chinatsu, who had been silently looking down, actually raised her foot and took a step towards her. The sound of the binding vow's shackles rattling continuously echoed, and Chinatsu's lowered head also slightly lifted. A confident expression, completely unlike someone resigning to a mutual demise, filled her eyes. What's wrong? Have you finally realized? You kept saying we were one, but why have you forgotten we are one at this most crucial point? The rattling sound of shackles. The sound of footsteps moving forward. At this moment, altered Chinatsu finally realized the crucial point she had overlooked from the very beginning due to her distracted thoughts. It wasn't that Chinatsu sacrificed everything to gain shackles strong enough to bind her. Rather, Chinatsu sacrificed the power she could wield within her spiritual world, so she, as also Chinatsu, was also confined of her power. Although the power confined to both sides was not equal, this was never an equal scale. The power of the two was not placed on two sides of a scale, but on the same side. The shackles of confined power bound them both. Now they only possessed pure spiritual strength, and in terms of spiritual strength alone, Chinatsu declared that she would not lose to anyone, let alone this other self, who had just been born like an infant. Amidst the rattling sounds of the shackles, Chinatsu quickly arrived in front of her other self, looking down at her as if from a superior position. Her eyes were filled with arrogance and confidence. This was undoubtedly the gaze befitting that Chinatsu. Their eyes met at close range, and the outcome of their spiritual duel was decided from the very beginning. And in the distance, in the direction Chinatsu was looking, Kenjaku's figure seemed to appear. Chinatsu simply ignored him and slightly raised her head. "Kenjaku, I won in the end." As Chinatsu's words left her mouth, the scene shifted from the depths of the spiritual world back to the barren reality. Satoru Gojo and the others were anxiously supporting Chinatsu's unconscious body, their faces full of worry. She's awake." As one of them shouted, everyone's gaze immediately converged on Chinatsu's face, which had been unconscious. Worry was clearly etched on their faces. In fact, earlier, because the real-world Chinatsu suddenly lost all signs of activity like a puppet, the three great domains, led by the full-power unlimited void, almost simultaneously inflicted irreversible damage on Chinatsu. Fortunately, the three of them noticed Chinatsu's abnormality at the last second, like a speeding sports car suddenly slamming on the brakes, which truly shocked them all. The unconscious Chinatsu slowly unfurled her brows, and a scene that shocked everyone present unfolded. One of her Rikugan, which had originally extended like a distant azure sky, now transformed into a dreamlike crimson. Had Chinatsu not yet regained her sanity? This thought flashed through everyone's minds, and the next sentence Chinatsu uttered dragged their hearts into the abyss. "Who are you?" Everyone present was stunned as if struck by lightning, none more so than Satoru Gojo. He clearly showed a bewildered expression, his mind racing. Could it be a binding vow? Regaining consciousness at the cost of her memories? An indescribable sadness welled up in his heart. Although there was a faint hint of evil emotion within it, it was almost instantly swallowed by the grief. He took a deep breath, his face showing an unprecedented seriousness and solemnity. Just as he was about to make a very solemn statement, Chinatsu, in their line of sight, suddenly couldn't help but let out a poof of laughter. She raised a hand and flicked Satoru Gojo, who was completely unprepared, on the forehead. Bang! Satoru Gojo covered his forehead with both hands and, along with everyone else, blinked in a daze. As they came to their senses, they all smiled in unison, including Chinatsu, despite the weakness evident on her face. "I'm back." Chapter 143: The Future. With Sukuna and Kenjaku's downfall, the jujutsu crisis that caused immense chaos across the country was gradually suppressed by the legitimate jujutsu sorcerers. However, restoring order to how it was before the chaos was clearly an impossible task. A few days later, in a private room at a Tokyo hospital, Chinatsu, sitting up in a bed by the window, quietly gazed out at the scenery. Gentle breezes wafted in from the window, caressing her face. At this moment she felt incredibly relaxed and content, for she had finally reached her ideal perfect ending. If not for the aches and pains all over her body, she would have truly wanted to go to a KTV and let loose. But there was nothing she could do. Since the national chaos began, she had frequently traversed various battlefields, and when facing Sukuna and Kenjaku, she had repeatedly imposed binding vows on herself to break through her limits. Even reverse curse technique had no significant effect on her. Now she could only rely on her body's adaptive mechanisms, combined with the passage of time, to slowly recover on her own. A small television was placed directly in front of her bed. Almost every news channel was broadcasting information about jujutsu. Jujutsu had completely entered the public eye. Under countless microphones and spotlights directed at his face, Masamichi Yaga, who had been pushed by everyone to be the representative, awkwardly twitched the corners of his mouth, maintaining a stiff smile, while inwardly cursing the brats who had pushed him onto the stage. However, he also knew that it was better for him to go up than those brats. But the pressure was immense. He had spent an entire night studying the speech he needed to deliver. He took a deep breath, then turned his head with a solemn expression, raising one hand. Puppet manipulation. Under everyone's gaze, the various dolls that had been placed awkwardly to the side suddenly came to life. Those with legs stood up from the ground, while those without legs floated in the air like ghosts. Although everyone was mentally prepared, they were still so startled by this scene that their mouths hung wide open, as if they could swallow an ostrich egg whole. In fact, they were surprised too early. There was even more shocking news to come. A few seconds later, the door to the press conference hall suddenly burst open from the outside. The reporters stiffly turned their heads towards the hall door. Panda. Panda with flowers in his mouth. Panda striking a pose. Hello everyone. Panda, facing the dumbfounded crowd, gave a charming expression that seemed to say, "You're looking at me like that, I'm a little shy," making those familiar with him feel a bit embarrassed and want to bang their heads against a wall. Of course, those who weren't familiar reacted even more strongly. Both in the hearts of the people present and in the live online comment sections, an unquenchable torrent of reactions erupted, as there were simply too many points to mock. Masamichi Yaga's mouth twitched slightly. He had actually told Panda to be a bit more normal, just walking and talking would have been enough to cause a sensation. Now both the hype and the atmosphere had reached a peak. Masamichi Yaga knew he had to do more, otherwise, such intense attention could provoke negative emotions. Masamichi Yaga's eyes narrowed and he began his speech. Though he had been incredibly nervous before going on stage, once there he seemed like a different person, eloquently expressing his views. Although reporters raised their hands to ask questions during the speech, Masamichi Yaga perfectly explained and appeased them. Actually, the point he wanted to convey was simple. The existence of jujutsu would not overly affect the functioning of normal society. The biggest evidence for this was that before jujutsu was exposed, it had secretly cooperated with the government to maintain balance for over 1,000 years. Chinatsu nodded slightly as she listened, feeling a bit sorry for Masamichi Yaga in her heart. After all, a large reason why he had to use so much rhetoric to explain now was due to Zen and Naoya's words during the national chaos. Welcome, you useless people who know nothing, protected by us jujutsu sorcerers, from the fake world to the real world. It was said that after the chaos subsided, his old man Zenin Mabasato gave him a thorough beating when he returned home. That face, which could originally be described as handsome, was beaten black and blue, making it hard not to describe him as comical. While thinking, Chinatsu picked up her phone from a corner of the bed. Opening the group chat, she found that Yeri Shoko and others were on their way to visit her. Yuta Okatsu, should we buy something? I'm just passing a fruit store. Yeri Shoko, fruit? Does Chinatsu like fruit? Is Gojo here? What fruit does your sister like? Gojo Satoru, fruit? Fruit cake. Immediately after sending that line, Gojo Satoru sent a selfie of himself at a cake shop, holding a 6-inch fruit cake. The chat group fell into a brief silence. While inwardly complaining about the siblings' love for sweets, they also turned and headed to dessert shops near them. Chinatsu looked at the silent chat group and couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Then she tossed her phone back into the corner of the bed, leaning her body against the wall by the bed, her crimson and azure eyes quietly gazing at the ceiling of the hospital room. Time passed by minute. Amidst the coming and going footsteps and conversations outside the room, a somewhat familiar but definitely not close voice suddenly blended in. Thump! 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 After a series of hurried footsteps, the door to her hospital room was pushed open from the outside. Chinatsu had already turned her head towards the door, and the moment it opened, her gaze met that of the newcomer. Long golden hair. Brown eyes. A toned physique. An impressive aura. Phew, you must be Chinatsu, right? I finally found you. Before, I thought you were in a room on the floor below. After going in, I found an old woman in that room, which scared me into thinking the information was wrong, and that you had sacrificed your life with a binding vow, you know. The woman who entered with a very natural familiarity said with a smile as she quickly walked to Chinatsu's bedside. After sitting on the edge of the bed, she looked closely at Chinatsu's face, or rather her eyes. Rikugan, eyes of the azure heaven. Now one of Chinatsu's eyes had turned crimson. Unlike the clear sky extending into the distance of the Rikugan, this crimson eye was full of charm, making people involuntarily want to look deeper and understand this eye and its owner. This obsessive woman was a jujutsu sorcerer, and she was the first to be given the title of special grade, though she had long been active abroad. Her name was Yukitsukumo. Chapter 144, Soul Research. Yukitsukumo was one of the first jujutsu sorcerers to be given the title of special grade. Her cursed technique, named Star Rage, is one that allows her to grant herself imaginary mass. Because her philosophy differed from the general consensus of Jujutsu High and even the Jujutsu world, she spent many years abroad conducting experiments and research. Why do cursed spirits come into existence? Because ordinary people inevitably leak cursed energy from their bodies, and these residual energies, through accumulation and the catalysis of negative emotions, form cursed spirits. In contrast, Jujutsu sorcerers can control their cursed energy relatively well. High-level Jujutsu sorcerers generally do not leak cursed energy, and the cursed energy leaked by lower-level ones is insufficient to form cursed spirits. Alright, so here is the problem. If one wants to create a world without cursed spirits, what should be done? Yukitsukumo stated there are two methods for this. 1. Erase the cursed energy of all humanity. This is extremely difficult, as within this system, cursed energy originates from humans and is in existence akin to a fundamental law. Only cursed lucky individuals like Toji Fushiguro are exceptions. 2. Allow all humanity to master cursed energy. This sounds simple and seemingly achievable, but the actual implementation is incredibly difficult, and a single mistake could potentially affect the functioning or even the collapse of normal society. In the original work, Satoru Gojo was already lost in confusion, and after hearing Yukitsukumo's theory, he misunderstood and became obsessive, ultimately heading down a path of no return. At this moment, Chinatsu looked with dead fish eyes at Yukitsukumo, who was trying to cling to her. To be honest, if she hadn't suddenly appeared now, Chinatsu would have almost forgotten her existence. Excuse me, is there something you need? I am extremely curious about you. Yukitsukumo's eyes seemed to hold a galaxy of stars. In her view, Chinatsu was full of things worth studying, with far too many unsolved mysteries. Chinatsu, can you still use jujutsu? Can you use cursed energy now? Yukitsukumo asked curiously. Chinatsu was slightly stunned by the question, then she raised one of her tightly clenched arms, and faint cursed energy fluctuations spread from her abdomen until they covered her arm. Seeing this, Yukitsukumo couldn't help but widen her eyes again, looking utterly disbelieving. Initially, the version of the rumor she heard while overseas was that Chinatsu had used her life as a price to place a binding vow on her rampaging self, and was now lying in the hospital as a vegetable. After getting off the plane upon returning home, the version of the rumor she received was that Chinatsu had not become a vegetable, but had sacrificed her cursed energy and thereby become an ordinary person. Now that she saw her, Yukitsukumo only wanted to express that these rumors were truly ridiculous. Chinatsu seemed perfectly fine, and it looked like she could be discharged safely after resting in the hospital for a few more days. Just as Yukitsukumo was thinking this, she suddenly noticed that the cursed energy covering Chinatsu's arm had already receded. Chinatsu was lowering her head, quietly gazing at her open palm. She hadn't completely abandoned her cursed energy, but whenever she used her power, the shackles deep within her spiritual world used to place a binding vow on her other self would loosen slightly. If she went all out as she usually did, it would be an implicit acknowledgement that the binding vow in her spiritual world was meaningless, and the Sukuna-like self imprisoned in her spiritual world would once again fight her for the right to use her physical body. Last time she used the binding vow to catch her off guard, but the next time the binding vow might not work again, because that self was also Chinatsu, and Chinatsu would not fall into the same trap twice. After a brief silence and contemplation, Chinatsu clenched her fist. In truth, she didn't crave power. The magnitude of her power only determined the success rate of achieving her perfect ending. Now that the perfect ending had been achieved, she could stop living the high-pressure 996 life. Furthermore, with the jujutsu task she had completed over the years and her family assets, Chinatsu was truly free to live lavishly. It should have been so, yet Chinatsu felt a slight emptiness in her heart. The thought of ignoring the jujutsu skills she had honed since childhood proved to be much harder to do than to say. As Chinatsu thought this, Yukitsukumo, watching the scene, already had a rough idea of what was on Chinatsu's mind. She took out a slightly worn notebook from the waist bag she was wearing and placed it on Chinatsu's quilt. This is one of the results of my research over these many years. I think it should be of some help to you. I remember everything in the notebook anyway. Yukitsukumo said with a smile, while Chinatsu stared distractedly at the notebook placed on her quilt. Soul Research Notes. This contains Yukitsukumo's research questions, experimental processes, and final theories regarding the subtle matter of the soul. Anyone familiar with the contents of this notebook can use cursed energy to slightly interfere with the soul. That's incredible. With every page she turned, Chinatsu became increasingly astonished by the contents, and words of praise involuntarily escaped her mouth. Yukitsukumo lifted her head slightly in pride, raised one hand, and gently wiped below her nose with 2 fingers held together. Hee, after all, I wasn't playing around during all those years I spent abroad. I hope you can use my research results to properly resolve the issues you're facing. I look forward to meeting the complete you. Yukitsukumo put her hands on her hips, lifted her head slightly, and simultaneously puffed 2 streams of air rapidly from her nostrils, anticipating Chinatsu's praise. Unfortunately, Chinatsu was completely engrossed in the soul research notes Yukitsukumo had given her, flipping through the pages one by one. This was an extremely rare occurrence, as Chinatsu usually felt sleepy whenever she encountered books. If it weren't for the fact that her learning speed, like Satoru Gojo's, was faster than falling asleep, her study habits would surely have cemented her status as a guaranteed academic failure. Seeing this, Yukitsukumo didn't sigh. After all, having someone appreciate her work was tantamount to praising herself. Just then, repeated footsteps echoed from the hallway outside the ward. As the sound of the steps grew clearer, the pace quickened, until finally it was obvious that someone was running. Bang! The ward door was pushed open. The group, led by Satoru Gojo, looked anxiously inside the room, sensing vaguely that there was another person besides Chinatsu in the ward. That person was a jujutsu sorcerer, a powerful jujutsu sorcerer who controlled her cursed energy fluctuations very steadily. As the group pushed open the door and looked inside, Yukitsukumo turned around, meeting their gaze with confidence, and twisted her body into an extremely alluring pose. What kind of women do you like? Chapter 145, Soul and Body. Special Grade Sorcerer Yukitsukumo? Among those standing frozen at the door of the hospital room, Suguru Geto was the first to open her mouth in surprise. She recognized Yukitsukumo because Chinatsu had once discussed with them this incredibly strong peer whose presence was almost non-existent. She was a woman who, despite being a special grade sorcerer, never took on any missions, was not affiliated with either Tokyo Jujutsu High or the higher UPS, and mysteriously went abroad, perfectly embodying the professional and the amateur. Feeling her companion's favorability towards her fluctuate, Yukitsukumo's entire demeanor seemed to change as she pitifully turned her head to Chinatsu. "Chinatsu, look at your little companion's attitude, I'm so heartbroken," Yukitsukumo said dramatically, resuming her seat on the edge of the hospital bed. As Yukitsukumo's words fell, Chinatsu, who was sitting up in the hospital bed, did not respond to her. She closed her eyes and the airflow between her lips and nose gradually calmed to a whisper. Satoru Gojo took 2 steps forward. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the soul research notes his older sister was holding. Yukitsukumo beside her also raised a finger to her lips, making a shushing gesture. At this moment, deep within Chinatsu's mental world. This world normally inaccessible, Chinatsu had learned how to actively enter through Yukitsukumo's in-depth research on souls. Soul, spirit, flesh, body. These two seem to be independent entities, but in the world of jujutsu they are intricately linked, influencing each other. For example, the disaster curse spirit Mahito's innate technique is called idol transfiguration, which allows him to interfere with others' souls through touch, and then by manipulating the soul cause the body to deform. Another example, in the original work, Toji Fushiguro died at the hands of Satoru Gojo, but later, a jujutsu sorcerer with seance technique applied Toji Fushiguro's physical information to her grandson. Normally, the grandson's soul would control Toji Fushiguro's body, but Toji Fushiguro's body in turn suppressed the grandson's soul, bringing Toji Fushiguro's spirit back. Deep within the mental world, Chinatsu once again saw her other half like Sukuna. The other party also showed a very surprised expression upon seeing her, but it was quickly suppressed, replaced by an arrogant face. "Why are you here? Do you want to gloat about your victory? Your personality is truly awful," altered Chinatsu said, grinning and with an aggressive demeanor. Chinatsu was somewhat helpless about this. Of course she wouldn't come to gloat about her victory, that would be too boring. However, this venomous tongue felt like it had not only been inherited, but had also surpassed the original, becoming even more potent. Chinatsu walked up to her other self and slowly raised one of her palms. A faint white special energy gradually floated above her palm. This was the power of soul interference. Although Chinatsu's mastery of this ability was still very immature, with a little practice, it would become a sharp blade to eliminate altered Chinatsu. Having a means to solve a problem, a normal person should be happy about it. However, Chinatsu lowered her head, gazing at the faint white energy on her palm, lost in thought. Finally, she waved her hand, dispelling the whitish energy. She lifted her head and looked once more at her other self, bound by shackles. When the azure blue eyes met the crimson red eyes, both fell into a long silence. "I will come again." With that, Chinatsu's figure gradually blurred and distorted, her consciousness returning from the mental world to reality. She slowly opened her eyes, exhaling a breath, and suddenly realized she had been too engrossed, causing her to ignore Yukitsukumo. She immediately turned her head, wanting to apologize to Yukitsukumo, who should have been beside her, but found the hospital room empty except for herself. A large group of people had left the room and were standing in the hallway, chatting. "Yukitsukumo, I plan to let everyone in the world master cursed energy. Although I know it's difficult, I still want to try. Suguru Geto, all of humanity mastering cursed energy? This method is a bit too idealistic, but I like this plan. If you need my help, I will assist. Satoru Gojo, since Geto said so, I'll reluctantly make time to help. Anyway, there are fewer cursed spirits recently, so our workload is much lighter. Yuta Okatsu, I'm sorry, I promised my family and Rika to travel abroad for a while recently, so I can't help right now. If there's anything I can help with when I return, I'll do my best. Yukitsukumo, haha, as fellow special grade sorcerers, let's get along well. We'll be very busy on this big stage in the future." Everyone chatted leisurely. Chinatsu, with her keen senses, listened to their conversation, and the corners of her mouth couldn't help but turn up slightly, revealing a relieved smile. She had put a lot of effort into preventing Suguru Geto's descent into darkness. She turned her head to look at the clear weather outside the window, sighing at the beauty of the world. Although she knew that beauty was only on the surface, if even the surface wasn't beautiful, then what lay beneath was probably even more turbid. Thinking this, Chinatsu became increasingly restless, wanting to leave the hospital room and go outside. But she knew her physical condition meant she had to stay in bed for at least another 10 days to half a month, otherwise, even sitting in a wheelchair wouldn't be comfortable. Chinatsu helplessly raised a hand and vigorously rubbed her hair. A strange sensation inexplicably surged from her heart. She blinked blankly and tentatively moved her upper body. It doesn't hurt much? The people chatting in the hallway were not dull-sensed. Such a commotion in the hospital room immediately caught their attention, and they instantly stopped their conversation, pushed open the hospital room door and walked in. "Older sister." Satoru Gojo's voice was cut short as soon as it began. The others beside him were the same, their eyes filled with astonishment. Chinatsu's body had been deemed unresponsive to either modern medicine or curse technique reverse. She could only slowly recover on her own. But at that moment, Chinatsu was standing by the hospital bed. Chinatsu, who had previously found even slight movements painful, was now turning left and right, doing warm-up exercises. What kind of medical miracle is this? Chapter 146, Chinatsu leaving the hospital. When a medical miracle occurred with Chinatsu, everyone who had just entered the room from the hallway was stunned, especially since Chinatsu was full of energy, turning left and right and doing warm-up exercises as if she were about to head into battle. "Sis, are you okay?" Seems so." As Chinatsu spoke, she finished her waist-twisting warm-up and started stretching her arms. The time she spent lying in the hospital had really suffocated her. After all, no one in this world likes staying in a hospital for long, right? Although the people in front of her remained surprised, more than surprised, they were happy for Chinatsu, though the happiness of two people among them was just a tiny bit impure. "Yeri Shoko, something incredible seems to have happened to Chinatsu. I really want to give Chinatsu a full body examination." "Yes, a full body examination. Chinatsu shouldn't refuse, right?" Yukitsukumo, whoa, did I just witness a miracle? I was originally thinking of going to see Toji Fushiguro later, the world's only known exception without cursed energy, but now it seems Chinatsu is definitely the rarer specimen. I feel like running some experiments. Sensing the little schemes hidden in their eyes, Chinatsu involuntarily shivered. She immediately looked toward Geto Suguru, whose expression was relatively innocent, raised both hands and gently clasped them, tilted her head slightly to the left, and flashed a smile. Suguru, help me process the discharge papers, okay? Geto Suguru was momentarily stunned. After realizing what she meant, he immediately responded and turned around, heading toward the counter on that floor of the hospital to handle the discharge procedures. Seeing this, Gojo Satoru still showed a worried expression. Just moments ago she was in so much pain he could barely move in bed. It was impossible for her to suddenly be able to move freely like a miracle had occurred. Something definitely happened. If this sudden recovery was merely the medical phenomenon of a final burst of energy before death. Gojo Satoru cared about his sister even more than he let on, especially now that his invincible sister in his mind had become so weak. The best time to seize the title of older brother? He wouldn't take advantage of her weakness. He hadn't given up the title of older brother, but he wanted to fiercely claim that position from his sister when she was in peak condition. Just as Gojo Satoru opened his mouth to say something, Chinatsu, who knew exactly what her little brother was thinking, raised a hand preemptively, signaling him not to speak further. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. 1 hour later. Chinatsu walked out of the hospital as she wished, spreading her arms straight and greedily breathing in the fresh air outside. She planned to stroll around outside by herself. She had already informed Gojo Satoru and the others that they would meet up again in the evening to have dinner together. She walked along the street with light steps. It had been nearly half a month since the chaos ended and she was left paralyzed in bed, and the outside world had truly changed significantly during that time. The concept of jujutsu was gradually becoming known to the general public, and through subsequent events people had divided into 3 factions. A portion of people were deeply interested in the concept of jujutsu, believing they could awaken abilities like protagonists in web novels and become peerless experts. They actively sought out information about jujutsu, and the 2 jujutsu high schools, which had no public location, were found by these capable individuals. Another portion of people deeply disliked the concept of jujutsu. Some of them had been persecuted by curse users or curse spirits during the chaotic phase, while others simply feared the unknown and uncontrollable. Compared to the 2 groups above, the largest group consisted of a third type of person who maintained a wait-and-see attitude toward jujutsu. They didn't actively seek out jujutsu news but weren't opposed to hearing about it either. This type of person seemed stable but was also a dangerous time bomb. If negative news about jujutsu suddenly broke out, a massive number of this large neutral group would shift into the legions denouncing jujutsu. Maintaining the balance between the jujutsu world and modern society was extremely complex and taxing, but at this moment, Chinatsu wasn't thinking about any of those tedious matters. She walked with light steps, humming a little tune. Boss, give me 1 serving of takoyaki. Chinatsu walked until she reached a food street. Smiling, she held up a finger toward the owner of a takoyaki stall. Takoyaki was a dish Chinatsu particularly loved. Even if all types of sweets were listed and ranked, takoyaki would still make it into the top 5. Her gaze, filled with anticipation, watched the stall owner meticulously preparing the little balls of takoyaki. She couldn't help but gulp and swallow a mouthful of saliva. When she received the piping hot box of takoyaki from the owner, she couldn't wait, immediately picking up a skewer, piercing a takoyaki ball, and preparing to pop it into her mouth. But just then she suddenly sensed a subtle fluctuation of cursed energy nearby. Chinatsu skeptically turned her head toward the direction where the cursed energy fluctuation was emanating. She saw a man wearing a baseball cap and a face mask standing in a corner of the street. Although he looked like he was waiting for someone, the cursed energy fluctuation radiating from him exposed his true intentions. Telekinetic jujutsu? That's quite rare, but using it for theft. I really don't know what to say about that. Chinatsu subconsciously raised a hand in that direction, preparing to use blue to stop this disgraceful jujutsu sorcerer from doing whatever he was planning and give him a remote lesson. But the moment she mobilized the cursed energy within her, she faintly felt the restrictive shackles of the binding vow wrapped around her. Chinatsu remained silent for a few seconds before looking down again at the takoyaki ball in her hand. After picking one up with the skewer and putting it into her mouth, she temporarily left the box containing the remaining balls with the owner and quickly walked toward the person who was manipulating the telekinetic cursed energy with his head bowed. Huh? Is something wrong? Bang! Before the Jujutsu sorcerer could react to Chinatsu's arrival, Chinatsu, chewing on the takoyaki, immediately delivered a monstrous punch straight to his abdomen. A third-rate Jujutsu sorcerer couldn't even manage cursed energy reinforcement, so how could he withstand a punch honed by Chinatsu's countless hours of training? The Jujutsu sorcerer's eyes immediately rolled back from the impact, and if Chinatsu hadn't been grabbing his collar, he would have collapsed onto the ground with weak legs. At the same time, Chinatsu gulped down the takoyaki ball in her mouth. She was wondering how to deal with this rogue, who wasn't a formal Jujutsu sorcerer but couldn't quite be counted as a curse user either, when she suddenly remembered that the television seemed to have mentioned that a private relevant department had been established domestically to handle Jujutsu disputes. However, no matter how hard Chinatsu tried to recall, she couldn't remember the contact phone number. She truly hadn't paid attention. Just as Chinatsu was pondering how to handle this rogue, a patrolling police officer happened to walk over. Regarding the woman punching the man, he assumed it was just a private matter, like a couple arguing. Even when he walked up to Chinatsu, he didn't pay much attention, until Chinatsu noticed the officer approaching and happily pushed the rogue she was holding toward him. "Officer, do you accept criminal jujutsu sorcerers here?" Chapter 147, New First Year. The police officer walking toward them stared dumbfounded, listening to Chinatsu's words and looking at the foam-mouthed jujutsu sorcerer she was dragging with one hand. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Although the concept of the jujutsu sorcerer had been formally introduced to the public, and a privately run relevant department was established to handle jujutsu disputes. However, there was a popular joke among the public: there's a work status called currently under investigation, and there's a department that can never be found, called the relevant department. As for the actual name of this relevant department, don't ask Confucius or Mencius if they know, I certainly don't. Seeing the confused look on the police officer's face, as if 3 large question marks were floating above his head, Chinatsu realized she had clearly asked the wrong person. "Sorry, I'll ask someone else then." Chinatsu waved dismissively at the police officer, took out her phone and dialed a number. Although she didn't know the phone number for the relevant department, Chinatsu could confidently state that she had connections. Surely she could find out how to handle a common criminal jujutsu sorcerer. Soon the call Chinatsu made was answered. Within her vast yet narrow network of contacts, she chose the relatively most reliable senior, her former homeroom teacher at Jujutsu High, who was now the principal of Jujutsu High. Yaga Mazamichi. Speaking of which, Yaga Mazamichi, who had recently been pushed to the forefront to handle the coordination between the jujutsu world and ordinary society, was extremely busy. At this moment he was sitting in the principal's office at Jujutsu High, his desk piled high with project documents. The phone next to him rang intermittently, mostly for consultation matters from ordinary society. "None of those brats bother coming over to help me share the load. Forget it. The great battle hasn't been over long, so I'll be considerate to you great heroes. But once I stabilize the general situation, none of you should think about slacking off anymore." Yaga Mazamichi muttered under his breath and wearily raised a hand to rub the bridge of his nose, letting out a sigh. Speaking of which, the Jujutsu Higher UPS had actually undergone a major reform. When did this happen? Naturally, it was during the period after the great battle when Chinatsu was lying in the hospital bed. How could such a major event as the formal integration of the jujutsu world and ordinary society still be left to the corrupt former jujutsu world higher-ups? Following a round of friendly and civilized discussions, nearly half of the former jujutsu world higher-ups vanished without a trace. If it weren't to prevent too many sudden vacancies from making the reform counterproductive, several more people would have disappeared from the surface. New replaced the old and ideals were updated. Chinatsu wasn't sure how long the positive effects of this reform would last. After all, just like there are no immortal dynasties, corruption is inevitable. All they could do was ensure this positive influence lasted as long as possible. However, whether or not they would become corrupt was a topic for the distant future. Even Yaga Mazamichi, who was currently handling state affairs, wasn't thinking that far ahead. Just as he had briefly finished handling the project documents and was about to lean back in his chair for a short rest, the phone on the desk suddenly rang. "Here we go again." Yaga Mazamichi sighed helplessly. He stood up again and reached for the phone, expecting another inquiry from ordinary society, but the voice on the other end was a familiar one. "Chinatsu? Hee, how have you been, Principal?" Even just hearing her voice, Yaga Mazamichi could imagine Chinatsu's cheeky grin. He didn't show any impatience, however, and patiently asked about Chinatsu's health before inquiring why she was calling him. Upon learning that Chinatsu had called him because she encountered a rogue jujutsu sorcerer attempting to commit a crime on the road but didn't know how to handle him, Yaga Mazamichi fell into a brief silence. If Chinatsu had encountered this before the jujutsu world integrated with ordinary society, she would have decisively attacked the curse user with a barrage of punches and kicks. A bruised and swollen face would have been considered getting off lightly. Normally, they wouldn't choose to detain them, as the manpower of jujutsu sorcerers wasn't abundant. It was easier to use the iron fist of love to physically discipline these disobedient guys, hoping they would turn over a new leaf and do something useful in the future. But now things were different. I will send people from the relevant department to take him into custody shortly. The past is the past and the present is the present. By the way, you haven't used private corporal punishment on that guy, have you? Listening to Yaga Mazamichi's words on the other end, Chinatsu paused, then looked down at the foam-mouthed, white-eyed jujutsu sorcerer she was currently dragging. Absolutely not. Chinatsu answered very sincerely, though Yaga Mazamichi had a good idea of how much credibility her words actually held. After two sighs on the other end of the line, Chinatsu thought the conversation was winding down and she could exchange a few more pleasantries before hanging up, but Yaga Mazamichi abruptly switched the topic to a different subject. Listening to Yaga Mazamichi's words, Chinatsu first fell into a brief silence, and then the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Of course, no problem. A few months later, on a bustling street, a girl wearing a jujutsu high uniform was talking to a model scout, though it was less of a conversation and more of a one-sided monologue from the girl. Model scout, what do you think of me? Well, I'm in a hurry. What's the big idea? Don't run away. Explain yourself. The girl's forceful words completely flustered the model scout in front of her. His face was covered in sweat, and though he tried to run, the girl yanked him back with one hand. Just as the scout was desperately pleading to be released, someone else, also wearing a jujutsu high uniform, walked quickly toward them with his hands in his pockets. My name is Fushiguro Megumi. You must be Nobara Kujisaki. Come with me, I'm taking you to report to Jujutsu High. Fushiguro Megumi stopped in front of Nobara Kujisaki. Whether it was his uniform or his rather cold tone of voice, Nobara Kujisaki's attention was instantly captured. Nobara Kujisaki scrutinized the aloof Fushiguro Megumi before her. She released the model scout's arm, placed one hand on her hip, and tilted her head slightly. Oh, so you're my classmate? You're not bad looking, but I don't really like men who are full of themselves. Sorry, but you're out.